The final note echoed through the Riverside Concert Hall, hanging in the air like a prayer. 12-year-old Naomi Carter lifted her hands from the piano keys, her small fingers trembling. The silence that followed was deafening. 2,000 people sat frozen in their seats, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what they had just witnessed. In the third row, Harrison Blackwood, one of the world's most celebrated pianists, stood motionless. His face had gone pale. His hands, which had commanded standing ovations in Vienna, Paris, and New York, now hung limply at his sides. Tears streamed down the faces of strangers. Grown men who had come expecting an evening of refined entertainment found themselves wiping their eyes. But how did a 12-year-old janitor's daughter end up here in front of 2,000 people at one of the most prestigious concert halls in the country? How did she silence an entire audience, including one of the world's most acclaimed pianists, who just an hour earlier had publicly mocked her? This is her story. And it started 6 years ago with a tragedy that would shape everything to come. Naomi Carter was 6 years old when her mother died. Sarah Carter had been a woman who loved music more than almost anything except for her daughter and husband. She had never had formal training, never attended a prestigious academy, never performed on a grand stage. But she had possessed something that no amount of money could buy: a pure, unadulterated love for the beauty of sound. Sarah worked as a nurse at County General Hospital, often pulling double shifts to help support the family. Her husband, James Carter, worked as a janitor at the Riverside Concert Hall, the same venue where the city's elite gathered to celebrate culture and refinement. Together, they barely made ends meet, but their small apartment was filled with something more valuable than money. It was filled with love, with laughter, and with music. Sarah would hum while cooking dinner melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. She would sing Naomi to sleep with lullabies that made the worn furniture and peeling paint disappear, transforming their modest home into a palace of sound. On Sarah's birthday, James had saved for months to buy her a small keyboard from a pawn shop. It wasn't much, just 25 keys, but Sarah treasured it like it was a Steinway grand. She would play simple melodies on that keyboard, and Naomi would sit beside her, mesmerized. Sarah would say, "Music isn't about how much you know, baby girl. It's about how much you feel. You can learn every note, every scale, every technique in the world, but if you don't feel it here," she would tap Naomi's chest right over her heart, "then it's just noise." Those words would echo in Naomi's mind for years to come. But at age 6, Naomi couldn't fully understand their weight. She only knew that when her mother played, even on that cheap keyboard, the world felt right. The world felt whole. Then, on a cold Tuesday in November, Sarah collapsed at the hospital. An aneurysm, the doctors said. She was gone before the ambulance even arrived. James Carter became both mother and father overnight. He held his daughter as she cried night after night, neither of them knowing how to navigate a world without Sarah's light. The keyboard sat silent in the corner of their apartment, too painful to touch, a reminder of everything they had lost. 6 months after Sarah's death, James returned to work at the Riverside Concert Hall. He needed the income. Needed the routine, needed something to anchor himself to reality. Every evening he would push his cleaning cart through the grand corridors, polishing the marble floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers above. He would empty trash bins in the lobby where wealthy patrons sipped champagne during intermissions. He would clean the bathrooms where women in evening gowns touched up their makeup and men in tuxedos adjusted their bow ties. But the heart of the building, the place James both loved and dreaded cleaning, was the main concert hall itself. It seated 2,000 people in plush velvet chairs that cost more than James made in a month. The stage was vast, with perfect acoustics that had been engineered by experts from around the world. And at the center of that stage sat a Steinway Model D concert grand piano, an instrument worth nearly $200,000. James would wait until after performances ended, after the audiences filed out, after the musicians packed their instruments and left through the back entrance. Then, in the silence of the empty hall, he would clean. He would sweep the stage dust, the piano polish, the wood, until it gleamed. Sometimes, if he was alone, he would stand beside that magnificent instrument and remember Sarah. He would remember her humming her, singing her small keyboard that couldn't produce even a fraction of the sound this masterpiece could create. What James didn't know was that Naomi had started following him to work. At 7 years old, she would finish her homework at the apartment, then walk the 6 blocks to the concert hall. She knew the security guard, Mr. Patterson, who had a soft spot for the quiet little girl who had lost her mother. He would let her slip in through the side entrance, and she would make her way to the upper balcony where she could watch without being seen. Night after night, Naomi sat in those balcony seats watching rehearsals, watching performances, watching musicians pour their souls into their instruments. She saw violinists move their bows with impossible grace. She watched cellists close their eyes as they played their entire bodies, swaying with the music. But what captivated her most was the piano. The way the pianist's fingers danced across the keys, creating sounds that made her chest ache with a feeling she couldn't name. The way a single instrument could sound like an entire orchestra, could whisper or thunder, could make you feel like you were flying or falling or standing perfectly still in the center of a storm. She would watch these musicians, these artists who had trained for decades, who had attended the finest schools, who had been born into families that could afford such luxuries. And she would wonder what it felt like to create something so beautiful. One night, after a particularly moving performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Naomi couldn't contain herself. After the audience left after her father finished his initial cleaning rounds and stepped out to empty his cart, Naomi crept down from the balcony. Her heart pounded as she crossed the empty hall, her footsteps silent on the thick carpet. She climbed the stairs to the stage, approaching the grand piano, like it was a sleeping giant she was afraid to wake. She reached out one small finger and pressed a single key. The sound that emerged was pure, perfect resonant. It filled the entire hall, echoing off walls designed to carry such beauty. Naomi pressed another key, then another. She tried to recreate a simple melody she had heard earlier that evening, something from Mozart. Her fingers fumbled. Her rhythm was off, but the sound, oh, the sound was everything she had dreamed it would be. She didn't hear her father return. She didn't see him standing in the wings, watching his daughter, his baby girl, sitting at a piano worth more than he would make in 10 years. James Carter stood there, tears streaming down his face, as he watched Naomi press those keys with the same expression Sarah used to have. That look of pure wonder, pure joy, pure connection to something greater than yourself. James didn't stop her. He didn't scold her for touching something so valuable, so far beyond their world. Instead, he let her play. And when she finally stopped, when she looked up and saw him standing there, she expected anger. But all she saw was love. All she saw was her father smiling through his tears, nodding slowly. "Your mama would have loved this," he whispered. From that night on, it became their secret. After his cleaning shifts, James would let Naomi play for 30 minutes, maybe an hour, if they were alone. She had no sheet music, no instruction books, no teacher. But she had something else. She had her mother's gift, that ability to feel the music rather than just play it. She would listen to pieces during rehearsals and performances, memorizing them, then trying to recreate them later. Sometimes she got it right. Sometimes she failed spectacularly, but she never stopped trying. This secret arrangement continued for nearly 2 years. Naomi turned 9, and her playing improved dramatically. She had taught herself to read the sheet music that musicians sometimes left behind on the stands. She would practice the pieces she heard her small hands stretching to reach chords that seemed impossible. Her father would sit in the front row of the empty hall, watching his daughter transform before his eyes. But secrets, especially beautiful ones, rarely stay hidden forever. Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan had been the director of music education at Riverside Concert Hall for 23 years. At 62 years old, she had dedicated her life to nurturing young talent-running programs that brought music education to students from all backgrounds. She had studied at Juilliard, performed with symphonies across Europe, and could have had a glittering career as a solo artist. Instead, she chose to teach, believing that passing on the gift of music was the highest calling anyone could have. Mrs. Sullivan often worked late, finalizing schedules, reviewing grant applications, planning upcoming seasons. One Thursday evening in March, as she gathered her belongings to leave, she heard something that made her stop. Music. Piano music. Coming from the main concert hall. This wasn't unusual in itself. Musicians often rented the space for practice. But there was no rental scheduled for that evening. And there was something about this particular playing that caught her attention. The technique was raw, unrefined. Whoever was playing had clearly never received formal training. But there was something else there, something that made Mrs. Sullivan's trained ear perk up. There was feeling. There was soul. There was that indefinable quality that separated people who played piano from people who were pianists. She followed the sound, pushing open the heavy doors to the main hall, and stopped in her tracks. There on the stage, illuminated by a single work light, sat a young black girl in a worn purple jacket, playing a Steinway grand piano, like she had been born to do exactly that. Her fingers moved across the keys with a natural grace that defied her obvious lack of training. She was playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and while she made mistakes while her dynamics were off, while her pedaling was awkward, the emotion was undeniable. Standing in the wings, cleaning supplies in hand, was James Carter. Mrs. Sullivan had seen him hundreds of times over the years, nodding politely as he cleaned around her office, always courteous, always quiet. She had never known he had a daughter. She had never imagined this scene. When Naomi finished the piece, Mrs. Sullivan began to clap. Both James and Naomi jumped, startled. Naomi immediately stood, terror flooding her face. They were caught. They had been using the piano without permission. James would lose his job. It was over. But Mrs. Sullivan wasn't angry. She walked down the aisle, her heels clicking on the floor, and climbed the stairs to the stage. She looked at Naomi. Really looked at her, and saw something that made her heart ache. She saw potential. She saw raw, unformed, magnificent potential. "How long have you been playing?" Mrs. Sullivan asked. Her voice was kind, gentle. Naomi looked at her father, who nodded. 2 years, ma'am," Naomi whispered. 2 years. "And who's been teaching you?" Naomi looked down at her shoes. "Nobody, ma'am. I just watch the people who play here, and then I try to do what they do." Mrs. Sullivan felt goosebumps rise on her arms. This child had taught herself to play Chopin by watching and listening. This child had natural musicality that some students never developed after decades of expensive lessons. Mrs. Sullivan made a decision in that moment, one that would change multiple lives. "What's your name?" she asked. "Naomi, ma'am. Naomi Carter." "Well, Naomi Carter, how would you feel about some proper lessons?" Naomi's eyes went wide. James stepped forward, his face pained. "Ma'am, I appreciate the kindness, but we can't afford lessons." "I'm sorry, baby." He looked at his daughter. "But we just can't." Mrs. Sullivan smiled. "I'm not asking for money, Mr. Carter. I'm asking for the opportunity to work with someone who clearly has a gift. If Naomi is interested, I would be honored to teach her. No charge. We can work around your schedule maybe twice a week after school. She can come here to the hall. Consider it part of our community outreach program." James stared at this woman, this stranger offering his daughter something he could never afford. Why, he asked, "Why would you do this?" Mrs. Sullivan looked at Naomi, who was standing perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. "Because talent like this doesn't come along often. Because every child deserves a chance to develop their gifts regardless of their circumstances. And because, frankly, I haven't been this excited about a student's potential in 10 years. So what do you say, Naomi? Would you like to learn?" Naomi looked at her father, her eyes brimming with tears and hope and disbelief. James Carter had spent 2 years watching his daughter teach herself to play, watching her find joy in something that connected her to her mother's memory. He had spent 2 years feeling helpless, wishing he could give her more, be more, provide more. And now somehow, impossibly, someone was offering to help. He nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Naomi turned to Mrs. Sullivan and whispered, "Yes, ma'am. I would like that very much." Over the next 3 years, Mrs. Sullivan became the mentor Naomi had never imagined she could have. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times. When schedules allowed, Naomi would come to the concert hall after school. Mrs. Sullivan taught her proper technique music theory, the history behind the pieces they studied. But more importantly, she nurtured what was already there, that natural musicality, that ability to make the piano sing rather than simply play. Naomi progressed faster than any student Mrs. Sullivan had ever taught. She was hungry for knowledge, practicing obsessively, carrying that cheap keyboard her mother had played everywhere she went so she could practice at home. James would fall asleep on their worn couch, listening to his daughter play the same passages over and over, perfecting them, making them her own. Naomi was 12 years old when Mrs. Sullivan approached her with an opportunity that would change everything. "The spring charity concert is coming up," she said. "It's our biggest event of the year. Musicians from around the country come to perform. And this year, I want you to be one of them." Naomi stared at Mrs. Sullivan, certain she had misheard. "You want me to perform at the spring concert?" Mrs. Sullivan nodded, her eyes twinkling. "I do. You're ready, Naomi. More than ready. You have something special, and I think it's time the world saw it." But Naomi's excitement was immediately tempered by fear. The spring charity concert wasn't just any event. It was the event. Tickets cost $500 each. The wealthiest people in the city attended, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, drinking champagne, discussing art and culture. These were people from a completely different world than Naomi's. "I don't know if I can do that," Naomi said quietly. "All those people, they're not like me. They're rich, they're educated. They'll look at me and see a janitor's kid who doesn't belong there." Mrs. Sullivan placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "They will see a talented young pianist, and if they see anything else, that's their problem, not yours. Music doesn't care about your bank account, Naomi. It doesn't care where you come from. It only cares about what you can make it say." That evening, Naomi told her father about Mrs. Sullivan's offer. They sat in their small kitchen eating spaghetti that James had cooked on their ancient stove. James listened carefully, watching his daughter's face cycle through excitement, fear, hope, and doubt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What does your heart tell you?" he finally asked. Naomi stirred her pasta, thinking. "My heart says I want to do it, but my brain says I'm going to embarrass myself in front of all those important people." James set down his fork and looked at his daughter with an intensity that made her meet his eyes. "Let me tell you something, baby girl. I've been cleaning that concert hall for 14 years. I've seen hundreds of performers come and go. Some of them were technically perfect. They hit every note exactly right. Their timing was flawless. Their technique was impeccable. But you know what? Half the time, people forget about them 5 minutes after they leave the stage. Then there are performers like your mama. People who might not have perfect technique, who might make mistakes, but who make you feel something. And those performers, people never forget them." He reached across the table and took Naomi's hand. "You play like your mama, Naomi. You make people feel things. That's a gift. And gifts are meant to be shared, not hidden away because we're afraid of what other people might think. So if you want to do this, if you really want to do this, then I'll be right there in that audience, wearing my best shirt, prouder than I've ever been in my life. And if you don't want to do it, that's okay too. But don't let fear make the decision for you." Naomi felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about her mother, about Sarah's voice, saying that music was about feeling, not about how much you knew. She thought about the past 3 years, about the hours of practice, about the joy she felt every time she sat at a piano. She thought about the opportunity Mrs. Sullivan was offering, an opportunity that kids from families like hers rarely got. And she made her decision. "I want to do it," she said. "I'm scared, but I want to do it." James smiled, squeezing her hand. "Then you're going to do it. And you're going to be magnificent." The weeks leading up to the concert were intense. Mrs. Sullivan helped Naomi select a piece that would showcase her strengths while being manageable for her skill level. They chose Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata third movement. It was challenging, demanding, but Naomi had been working on it for months and knew it by heart. Every spare moment was spent practicing. Naomi would wake up an hour early to practice on her small keyboard before school. She would rush to the concert hall after her last class, practicing for 2 or 3 hours, under Mrs. Sullivan's guidance. At night, she would lie in bed, fingers moving on her blanket, mentally rehearsing every passage. James watched his daughter pour herself into this preparation with a mixture of pride and worry. He was proud of her dedication, her talent, her courage. But he also knew the world she was about to enter. He knew how those wealthy patrons looked at people like him. He had seen it in their eyes 1,000 times, that mixture of pity and dismissal, the way they looked right through service workers as if they were invisible. He worried about what would happen when those same people saw his daughter on that stage. Would they appreciate her talent? Or would they only see what he saw every day in their eyes? Someone beneath them, someone who didn't belong in their world. He didn't share these fears with Naomi. She had enough to worry about. Instead, he encouraged her, supported her, and prayed that she would be judged by her talent and nothing else. But deep in his heart, he knew the world didn't work that way. Not for people like them. The night of the spring charity concert arrived with perfect weather. It was late May, warm, but not hot, with a clear sky full of stars. The Riverside Concert Hall glowed like a jewel, its elegant facade illuminated by carefully positioned lights. Limousines and luxury cars pulled up to the entrance, depositing men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns. Diamonds glittered at throats and wrists. The air smelled of expensive perfume and privilege. James and Naomi arrived 2 hours early. They didn't have a limousine. They took the bus, the same one James rode every day to work. Naomi wore the best dress they could afford, a simple navy blue one they had found at a thrift store. James had pressed his one good shirt and the dress pants he wore to church on Sundays. Mrs. Sullivan had arranged for them to use the performers' entrance, sparing them the walk past the red carpet, where photographers captured the arrival of the wealthy donors and patrons. Backstage was chaos. Performers warmed up in various practice rooms. Violinists ran through scales. Singers vocalized. Pianists worked through difficult passages. The energy was electric, charged with anticipation and nerves. Naomi found a small practice room and sat at the upright piano there, running through her piece one final time. Her fingers knew every note, every phrase, every subtle dynamic shift, but her heart was racing and her hands felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Mrs. Sullivan found her there 20 minutes before the concert was scheduled to start. "How are you feeling?" she asked. Naomi looked up, her eyes wide. Terrified, she admitted. Mrs. Sullivan smiled gently. "Good. That means you care. But remember, Naomi, you've earned your place on that stage. You've worked harder than most of the other performers here tonight. You have nothing to prove to anyone except yourself. When you sit at that piano, it's just you and the music. Everyone else disappears." Can you remember that Naomi nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it? How could everyone else disappear when there would be 2,000 of them all watching her, all judging her? But she appreciated Mrs. Sullivan's confidence, her unwavering support. "Your father is already in his seat," Mrs. Sullivan continued. "Third row, right side. He looks very handsome in his pressed shirt." This made Naomi smile, despite her nerves. She could picture her father sitting there, probably more nervous than she was, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. As Mrs. Sullivan left to attend to other performers, Naomi closed her eyes and tried to center herself. She thought about her mother, about Sarah's hands on that cheap keyboard, about the love that had filled their small apartment despite having so little money. She thought about her father working long hours as a janitor, never complaining, always supporting her dreams, even when they must have seemed impossible. She thought about Mrs. Sullivan, who had seen something in a young girl playing unauthorized on a stage and decided to nurture it rather than punish it. All of these people believed in her. The least she could do was believe in herself. Meanwhile, in the main concert hall, the audience was settling into their seats. The atmosphere was exactly what James had feared it would be. Women in gowns that cost more than his annual salary, men discussing their latest investments, conversations about vacation homes in the Hamptons and upcoming trips to Europe. This was high society, the upper echelon of the city's social structure. And somewhere in the middle of it all sat James Carter in his pressed shirt from J.C. Penney and his 15-year-old dress pants, feeling like an imposter. The woman sitting next to him, dripping in pearls and smelling of lavender, glanced at him with barely concealed curiosity. He clearly didn't belong. He didn't have the expensive watch, the designer clothing, the air of casual wealth that everyone else seemed to carry like a second skin. But James held his head high. He had as much right to be here as anyone else. His daughter was performing tonight. His daughter, who had worked harder than any of these people could imagine, who had talent that couldn't be bought at any price. He belonged here because she belonged here. The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The concert was about to begin. And James Carter said a silent prayer that his daughter would get the recognition she deserved, that she would be judged fairly, that talent would matter more than background. But he had lived in this world long enough to know that sometimes fairness was just a dream. Sometimes the world judged you before you even opened your mouth, before you played a single note, before you had a chance to prove your worth. He just hoped tonight would be different. He hoped his daughter would get her chance to shine. Before the concert began, while the audience was still settling in, Naomi stood in the wings, watching the stage crew make final adjustments to lighting and microphone positions. Her stomach churned with nerves. In less than 2 hours, she would walk out onto that stage. 2,000 people would be watching her. The thought was paralyzing. She was so lost in her anxiety that she didn't notice the man who approached her until he spoke. First time performing. The voice was smooth-cultured, with the faint hint of an accent that suggested expensive education and international experience. Naomi turned to find herself looking at a tall man in an immaculate tuxedo. He was perhaps 40 years old, with silver-streaked dark hair styled perfectly. Everything about him screamed wealth and refinement. His cufflinks probably cost more than her father's car. This was Harrison Blackwood, though Naomi didn't yet know his name. "Yes, sir," Naomi answered quietly. Harrison smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Charming. And what will you be playing tonight, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Third Movement?" Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ambitious choice. That's quite technically demanding. Have you been studying long 3 years, sir?" 3 years. Harrison laughed, a sound that made Naomi feel small. "And they have you playing Beethoven? That's adorable. Where do you study? Riverside Academy, Walton School?" These were the prestigious private schools where the children of the wealthy received top-tier education. Naomi shook her head. "I go to Lincoln Middle School, sir. It's public." Harrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Public school. I see. And your private teacher, who are they? Mrs. Sullivan teaches me. She's the director of music education here." "Eleanor Sullivan. She's teaching you?" Harrison looked genuinely surprised. "How did you manage to arrange that? Those lessons must be quite expensive." Naomi felt her cheeks burn. "She doesn't charge me, sir. She teaches me for free." There was a brief silence. Harrison looked at Naomi more carefully now, taking in her thrift store dress, her worn shoes, the way she held herself with a mixture of pride and insecurity. Understanding dawned on his face, and with it came something else. Something that looked uncomfortably like pity, mixed with disdain. "For free," he repeated slowly. "How generous of her. And what do your parents do, if you don't mind my asking?" Naomi wanted to lie. She wanted to say her father was a businessman, a lawyer, anything other than what he actually was. But she had been raised to tell the truth, and she wasn't about to start lying now, no matter how much it hurt. "My father works here, sir. He's a janitor." She said it with as much dignity as she could muster. Her chin lifted, her voice steady despite the burning shame she felt. Harrison's smile became patronizing. "A janitor? Of course. How wonderfully egalitarian of this organization. Tell me, have you ever actually attended a professional concert before tonight? Besides whatever you might have heard while your father was cleaning, I mean." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable now. Naomi felt something cold settle in her stomach. "I've watched many concerts, sir. From the balcony." "From the balcony? While they were empty, I assume." Harrison shook his head, his expression a mixture of amusement and something crueler. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't mean to be harsh, but you should know what you're getting into tonight. The people in that audience, they've been attending concerts their entire lives. They know the difference between professional playing and well-enthusiastic amateur work. 3 years of lessons, even from someone as skilled as Eleanor, isn't really enough preparation for a performance like this, especially for someone from your background." The last words hit like a slap. "From your background." Naomi knew exactly what he meant. Poor, uneducated, black. All the things that people like Harrison Blackwood believed made someone inferior. She wanted to defend herself, to tell him that she had worked harder than he could possibly imagine, that talent didn't care about money or privilege. but the words stuck in her throat. She was 12 years old, facing down a man who radiated authority and success, and she felt powerless. "I'm Harrison Blackwood, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "Perhaps you've heard of me." Naomi shook his hand limply. She had heard of him. Everyone involved in classical music had heard of Harrison Blackwood. He was one of the most celebrated pianists in the world, winner of the prestigious Van Cliburn competition at age 25, performer at Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center, Royal Albert Hall. He had recorded albums that sold millions of copies. He was everything that pianists aspired to be. And he was looking at her like she was a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. "I'm performing tonight as well," Harrison continued. "The Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 3. You're familiar with it, I assume?" Naomi nodded. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the piano repertoire, known for breaking even experienced pianists. "Wonderful. I'm sure after you hear it performed properly, you'll have a better understanding of what professional piano playing actually sounds like. Consider it an education." He smiled again, that patronizing smile that made Naomi want to shrink into the floor. Then he walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Mrs. Sullivan found her a few minutes later, tears threatening to spill down Naomi's cheeks. "What happened?" she asked, immediately concerned. Naomi recounted the conversation, her voice shaking. Mrs. Sullivan's face grew hard with anger, but when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Harrison Blackwood is a brilliant pianist," she said carefully. "But brilliance in one area doesn't make someone a good person. He grew up with every advantage, Naomi. Private tutors from age 4, the best school's unlimited practice time, because his family was wealthy enough that he never had to work. He's never had to fight for anything. He doesn't understand what it means to work as hard as you have. And you know what? That's his loss, not yours." Naomi wanted to believe her, but Harrison's words had burrowed deep. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was fooling herself, thinking she could stand on the same stage as people who had dedicated their entire lives to music, who had resources she could only dream of. Maybe this was all a terrible mistake. "Look at me," Mrs. Sullivan said firmly. Naomi met her eyes. "You belong on that stage just as much as Harrison Blackwood. You have something he doesn't have, something that can't be taught or bought. You have heart, you have soul, and when you play, people feel that. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Not Harrison Blackwood, not anyone." Naomi nodded, but the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing rapidly, threatening to choke out her confidence entirely. She retreated to her practice room, trying to focus on her piece, but Harrison's voice kept echoing in her mind. "From your background? Amateur work? Not enough preparation?" The words circled like vultures, picking at her resolve. In the main hall, the concert began. The first performer was a violinist, brilliant and precise. The second was a soprano who received a standing ovation. Each performance was excellent professional, exactly what the wealthy audience expected and appreciated. And with each performance, the pressure on Naomi grew heavier. The concert had been underway for 45 minutes when Harrison Blackwood took the stage. The audience, already impressed by the evening's performances, shifted forward in their seats with anticipation. Harrison was the star of the show, the name that had sold tickets, the reason many of these patrons had paid $500 to attend. The orchestra had filed onto the stage, tuning their instruments in that chaotic but oddly beautiful cacophony that precedes a symphonic performance. The conductor, a distinguished man named Frederick Morrison, raised his baton. The hall fell silent. Then, with a gesture that was somehow both delicate and commanding, he brought the orchestra to life. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 filled the hall, those powerful sweeping chords that immediately announced something magnificent was about to unfold. Harrison waited for his entrance with the perfect stillness of a master performer. When the moment came, his hands descended on the keys with absolute confidence. What followed was, objectively speaking, brilliant. Harrison's technique was flawless. His fingers flew across the keyboard with impossible speed and precision during the rapid passages. During the slower, more lyrical sections, he drew out phrases that seemed to hang in the air like silk scarves. He commanded the instrument, absolutely extracting every possible nuance from one of the most demanding pieces ever written for piano and orchestra. The audience was mesmerized. In the wings, Naomi watched along with several other performers. She had heard this concerto dozens of times, had watched it performed by various artists. But watching Harrison play, it was something else entirely. He was undeniably masterful. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped exactly right. The technical demands that destroyed lesser pianists seemed effortless under his hands. And yet, even as Naomi recognized his brilliance, she felt something was missing. It was perfect, but it was cold. It was technically immaculate, but it didn't make her feel anything. It was like watching a machine execute a program flawlessly beautiful in its precision, but lacking something essential, something human. But the audience didn't seem to notice or care. When Harrison played the final crashing chords and the orchestra swelled to meet him, the hall erupted. People leaped to their feet, applauding wildly. Bravos echoed from all corners. Harrison stood bowed with practiced humility, gestured to the orchestra and conductor, and soaked in the adulation with the ease of someone who expected nothing less. This was his world. These were his people. This was where he belonged. James Carter, sitting in his third-row seat, applauded politely, but with less enthusiasm than those around him. He had felt the same thing Naomi had: technical perfection, but emotional emptiness. But he was also terrified, because now his daughter would have to follow this performance. How could a 12-year-old girl, no matter how talented, measure up to what they had just witnessed? The audience would inevitably compare them, and Naomi would come up short through no fault of her own. She was competing not just with her own nerves, but with the afterglow of Harrison Blackwood's triumph. There was a 15-minute intermission. Patrons filed into the lobbies, refreshing their champagne, discussing the performance they had just witnessed. The consensus was universal. Harrison Blackwood had been spectacular. Many people were already preparing to leave after intermission, satisfied that they had seen the evening's highlight, and not particularly interested in the remaining performances by lesser-known artists. James made his way backstage, needing to see his daughter before her performance. He found her in the small practice room, sitting at the upright piano, but not playing, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. "Hey, baby girl," he said softly. Naomi looked up, and James's heart broke at the fear he saw in her eyes. "I can't do this, Daddy," she whispered. "Did you see him? Did you see how amazing he was? I can't follow that. Everyone's going to compare me to him, and I'm going to look ridiculous." James sat down beside her on the piano bench, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You know what I saw out there?" he asked. "I saw a man who plays every note perfectly but doesn't make you feel a single thing. You know what else I saw? I saw your mama. Not in him, but in you. Your mama could make a cheap keyboard sound like heaven because she played with her heart. That's what you do too." "But what if I mess up?" Naomi's voice cracked. "What if I forget the notes, or my hands shake, or I hit a wrong key? What if everyone laughs?" "Then everyone laughs," James said simply, "and you'll survive it. But you know what, I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to walk out there, sit at that piano, and you're going to make every single person in that hall feel something real. Not perfect technique, not showmanship, something real, and that's worth more than 1,000 perfect performances." He kissed the top of her head. "Your mama would be so proud of you right now. Not for what you're about to do on that stage, but for having the courage to try. That's what matters, Naomi. Not whether you're perfect, not whether you're better than Harrison Blackwood, but that you had the courage to try." Naomi leaned into her father, drawing strength from his steady presence. He always knew what to say, always knew how to make her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do hard things. The 5-minute warning sounded. It was almost time. The audience returned to their seats after intermission. The hall was noticeably less full than before. Perhaps 200 people had left, deciding they had gotten their money's worth from Harrison Blackwood's performance, and seeing no reason to stay for the less prestigious performers who would close out the evening. Those who remained settled in with the polite attention of people fulfilling a social obligation rather than genuine enthusiasm. The next performer was a cellist, followed by a chamber ensemble. Both were very good, but the energy in the hall had shifted. The evening's climax had already occurred, or so everyone believed. Then came the moment James had been dreading and Naomi had been working toward for months. The master of ceremonies, a silver-haired man named Richard Thornton, who sat on the board of directors, stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final performer of the evening is quite special. I'm pleased to introduce Miss Naomi Carter, a young pianist who has been studying with our very own Director of Music Education, Mrs. Eleanor Sullivan." There was polite applause. Richard continued. "Miss Carter comes to us from Lincoln Middle School, and she'll be performing the third movement of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. This is particularly noteworthy because Miss Carter is the daughter of James Carter, who many of you may not know has been maintaining this beautiful facility for the past 14 years as part of our janitorial staff." The applause became more scattered. There were murmurs through the audience. A janitor's daughter, playing Beethoven. On this stage, some people seemed charmed by the idea. A feel-good story about giving opportunities to the less fortunate. Others seemed confused or mildly affronted that their evening of high culture was being concluded with what amounted to a charity case. And then there was Harrison Blackwood. He had been standing in the wings preparing to leave when he heard Richard's introduction. A janitor's daughter, the same girl he had encountered earlier, playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata third movement, one of the composer's most technically demanding pieces. Harrison felt a surge of second-hand embarrassment for the girl. This was going to be a disaster. He had tried to warn her earlier, but apparently Eleanor Sullivan had filled the child's head with unrealistic ideas about her abilities. "This should be interesting," Harrison said to a cellist standing nearby, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The girl told me she's had 3 years of lessons. 3 years and they're having her close the show with Beethoven. It's almost cruel." The cellist, a kind woman named Rebecca, gave him a sharp look. "Perhaps you should wait to hear her play before passing judgment." Harrison laughed. "I don't need to hear her play. I've been performing for 30 years. I know what 3 years of training produces, especially for someone who doesn't have access to private instruction quality instruments or immersion in the culture." This is a nice gesture by Eleanor, very egalitarian and politically correct, but it's not going to be actual artistry. On stage, Naomi stood in the wings, hearing every word of the introduction. She heard the shift in the audience's energy. She heard the murmurs. And then from somewhere in the wings, she heard a laugh. A distinctive, cruel laugh that she recognized immediately. She turned and saw Harrison Blackwood not bothering to hide his amusement speaking to another musician. She couldn't hear his exact words, but his body language said everything. He was mocking her. Mrs. Sullivan appeared at Naomi's side. "Don't listen to them," she whispered urgently. "Don't listen to anything except the music in your heart. You can do this." But Naomi's legs felt like they had turned to stone. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The stage lights seemed impossibly bright, the audience impossibly large. Every insecurity, every doubt, every moment of feeling less than rushed over her like a tsunami. She was a janitor's daughter about to play for people who looked down on her father, who looked down on her, who would judge her not just on her playing, but on her very right to exist in their space. "I can't," Naomi whispered. "I can't do it." "Yes, you can," Mrs. Sullivan said firmly. "You've worked for this. You've earned this. Don't let fear win." But it wasn't just fear. It was humiliation. It was the weight of Harrison Blackwood's dismissal of the audience's polite skepticism, of knowing that no matter how well she played, many people in that hall would never see past her background. She was about to provide entertainment for the wealthy, a cute story they could tell at dinner parties about the underprivileged girl who got to play piano at a real concert. She was a novelty, not a serious musician. From the front of the hall, Richard's voice came again. "Miss Carter, are you ready?" The silence stretched. Naomi stood frozen. Then from the third row, she saw movement. Her father was standing up. James Carter, in his J.C. Penney shirt, stood in a sea of designer tuxedos and evening gowns. He caught her eye and placed his hand over his heart. It was their signal, something they had done since Naomi was small. It meant, "I love you." It meant, "I'm here." It meant, "You're not alone." Something shifted in Naomi's chest. She looked at her father, this man who had cleaned toilets and mopped floors to give her every opportunity he could. This man who had never once made her feel like she was less than anyone else, who had taught her that dignity came from within, not from a bank account or a title. This man who believed in her absolutely, without question, without reservation. She thought about her mother, about Sarah, saying that music was about feeling, not about knowledge or training or privilege. She thought about every hour she had practiced, every sacrifice her father had made, every lesson Mrs. Sullivan had given her out of pure generosity. And she thought about Harrison Blackwood standing in the wings with his smirk and his certainty that she would fail. Something hot and fierce flared in Naomi's chest. It was anger, yes, but it was more than that. It was determination. It was pride. It was the refusal to be dismissed, to be patronized, to be written off before she had even played a single note. She had earned her place on this stage, not through money or connections or privilege, but through work and talent and sheer determination. She deserved to be here. Naomi walked onto the stage. Each step felt like moving through water, her body heavy with adrenaline and fear. But she kept walking. The audience watched, some curious, some skeptical, some already checking their watches to see how long they had to endure this before they could leave. Harrison in the wings shook his head slightly, already cringing in anticipation of what he assumed would be an embarrassing performance. Naomi reached the piano, the same Steinway Model D that she had been practicing on for 3 years, the same instrument she had first touched as a 7-year-old, pressing a single key and marveling at its perfect sound. She adjusted the bench, sat down, and placed her hands in her lap. She took a deep breath. Then another. The hall was quiet, waiting. And in that moment before beginning, Naomi made a choice. She chose not to play for the audience. She chose not to play to prove Harrison Blackwood wrong. She chose to play for her mother, who had loved music more than anything. She chose to play for her father, who had sacrificed everything to give her this chance. She chose to play for herself, for that 7-year-old girl who had fallen in love with the sound of a piano and had never stopped loving it. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata third movement emerged from the Steinway with crystalline clarity. The piece begins with a right-hand arpeggiated figure over an octave bass in the left hand, establishing the turbulent, stormy character that defines the entire movement. Naomi's hands moved with confidence that belied her racing heart. She had played these opening measures thousands of times. They were written into her muscle memory and coded into her very being. But something unexpected was happening. As Naomi played, something inside her began to shift. The fear that had threatened to overwhelm her moments ago was transforming. With each phrase, with each measure, she felt herself slipping into a state she had experienced before during practice, but never in front of an audience. It was a state where the world fell away, where self-consciousness dissolved, where nothing existed except her and the music. The technical demands of the piece were significant. The right hand's constant 16th note arpeggios had to maintain perfect evenness, while the left hand provided bass notes and counter melodies. Dynamic contrasts had to be sharp and clear. The tempo had to be brisk without becoming frantic. Naomi navigated all of this with a focus that surprised even herself. But more than technical proficiency, something else was emerging in her playing, something that couldn't be taught or learned from a textbook. In the third row, James Carter gripped the armrests of his seat so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Tears were already forming in his eyes. He had heard Naomi play this piece dozens of times during her practice sessions. But this was different. This was his daughter on a professional stage holding her own. More than holding her own. She was magnificent. Around him, he could sense the audience's attention shifting. People who had been checking their phones or whispering to companions were growing quiet, drawn in despite themselves. In the wings, Mrs. Sullivan stood with her hand pressed to her mouth, her own eyes glistening. She had believed in Naomi from the moment she heard her play that first Chopin nocturne 3 years ago. But belief and witnessing were two different things. Watching her student, this girl, who had every disadvantage society could provide, commanding that stage, with such presence, such artistry, was almost overwhelming. Mrs. Sullivan had taught hundreds of students over her decades-long career. She had worked with prodigies, with children of celebrities, with students who had every advantage money could buy. But she had rarely seen anything like what she was witnessing now. Harrison Blackwood had remained in the wings, intending to leave, but finding himself unable to move. His expression had shifted from smug anticipation of embarrassment to confusion to something approaching disbelief. This wasn't what he had expected. The girl was technically solid, which was surprising enough given her limited training, but that wasn't what held his attention. There was something in the way she played, some quality he couldn't immediately identify, that made him unable to look away. It irritated him, this feeling of being proven wrong by a 12-year-old from the wrong side of town. As Naomi moved into the middle section of the piece, the music became more demanding. There was a fugal section that required absolute clarity of individual voices while maintaining the overall momentum. Then came the technically treacherous passages where both hands played rapid scales and arpeggios in contrary motion. These sections broke even experienced pianists. They required not just technical facility, but mental fortitude, the ability to maintain control when the music seemed to be spiraling into chaos. Naomi attacked these passages with a ferocity that surprised the audience. This wasn't the tentative playing of a nervous child. This was committed, confident musicianship. Yes, she was nervous. Yes, her heart was pounding. But something had taken over some deeper part of herself that knew this music, that understood it at a level beyond conscious thought. Her fingers flew across the keys, executing runs that most professionals would find challenging. There were tiny imperfections notes that weren't quite as clean as they could have been, a few moments where the voicing could have been clearer. But these minor flaws were overwhelmed by the passion, the commitment, the sheer presence she brought to the performance. Naomi was no longer playing Beethoven's notes on a page. She was channeling something deeper, something that connected to her own experience of struggle and determination. Every harsh chord was a declaration that she belonged here. Every delicate phrase was a reminder that beauty could emerge from unexpected places. Every technically demanding passage was proof that hard work and talent could overcome the advantages of wealth and privilege. The audience felt it. Even those who had come prepared to be politely dismissive, even those who had viewed her as a charity case, found themselves leaning forward, caught up in what they were hearing. This wasn't just good playing. This was communication. This was a 12-year-old girl using a piano, telling them something essential about human resilience and dignity. As Naomi approached the final section of the piece, the recapitulation where themes from the beginning return with even greater intensity, she felt tears forming in her own eyes. She was thinking about her mother, about Sarah Carter, who never got to see this moment, but whose love of music had made it possible. She was thinking about her father, sitting out there in the audience, who had worked every day without complaint to give her a life better than his own. She was thinking about Mrs. Sullivan, who had seen potential in a scared little girl and had chosen to nurture it rather than dismiss it. And she was thinking about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, who had been judged by their address or their parents' jobs rather than their own abilities. She played for all of them. She played for every janitor's kid who dreamed of something more. She played for everyone who had ever been laughed at, dismissed, or patronized. The final measures of Beethoven's masterpiece approached. The music built to its dramatic conclusion, those crashing chords and rapid scales that culminate in the final decisive ending. Naomi's arms raised, her hands came down with all the force she could muster, and the last chord rang out through the concert hall, powerful and defiant, and absolutely undeniably right. The final chord of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata hung in the air, reverberating through the concert hall's perfect acoustics. Naomi's hands remained on the keys, her fingers pressing down, sustaining that last powerful statement. Her chest was heaving from the physical exertion of the performance. Her vision was blurred with unshed tears. Her entire body was shaking with adrenaline and emotion, and the overwhelming sense that something significant had just happened, though she couldn't yet process what. The hall was silent, completely, utterly silent. No coughs, no rustling programs, no whispers. 2,000 people sat frozen, as if they had all collectively forgotten how to move. Naomi slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The sound decayed gradually, the final echoes disappearing into the far corners of the hall. Still, no one moved. Still, no one made a sound. Naomi sat at the piano bench, unsure what to do. Had she done something wrong? Had she made a terrible mistake she hadn't noticed? Was the silence a sign of disapproval? She felt exposed, vulnerable, sitting there on the stage with all those eyes on her. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Naomi's heart, which had been racing during the performance, now pounded even harder. She wanted to run, to disappear, to be anywhere but on this stage in front of all these people who were just sitting there staring at her, saying nothing. In the third row, James Carter's face was wet with tears. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He had just watched his daughter do something impossible. He had seen her take everything that made her different, everything that people like Harrison Blackwood thought made her less than, and transform it into music that stopped time. His baby girl. His Naomi. She had just shown every single person in that hall what real artistry looked like, and they knew it. He could see it on their faces. They knew they had witnessed something rare and precious. Mrs. Sullivan stood in the wings with tears streaming down her face. In 40 years of teaching music and decades of attending performances and competitions and concerts, she had rarely seen anything like what had just occurred. Naomi hadn't just played well. She had transcended the notes on the page. She had taken Beethoven's composition and made it her own, infusing it with her own story, her own pain, her own triumph. This was why Mrs. Sullivan had dedicated her life to music education. For moments like this. For students like Naomi. Harrison Blackwood stood completely still, his face pale. Something uncomfortable was churning in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It was recognition. Grudging, unwanted, but undeniable recognition. The girl had played with technical proficiency that shouldn't have been possible with only 3 years of training. But that wasn't what had affected him. What affected him was the same thing affecting everyone else in the hall. The emotion, the commitment, the absolute conviction in every phrase. He thought about his own performance earlier that evening, the Rachmaninoff that had received a standing ovation. That performance had been perfect. Every note had been exactly right. The technique had been flawless. But this performance by a 12-year-old janitor's daughter had made him feel something his own performance hadn't. It had reminded him of why he had started playing piano in the first place, before the competitions and the recordings and the reviews. It had reminded him of music as communication, as expression, as something more than just technical mastery. And that realization made him deeply uncomfortable because it meant acknowledging that he had been wrong. Wrong about Naomi. Wrong about what mattered in music. Wrong about the importance of background and training versus raw talent and heart. The silence continued. 20 seconds. 25. Naomi finally gathered the courage to stand. Her legs were shaking. She turned to face the audience, preparing to walk off stage in the deafening quiet, already assuming the worst. This had been a mistake. She had embarrassed herself, embarrassed her father, embarrassed Mrs. Sullivan. She had proven Harrison Blackwood right. She didn't belong here. But as she turned, as she took that first shaky step, something happened. In the back of the hall, a woman stood up. She was perhaps 60 years old, wearing an elegant emerald gown and diamond earrings. Her name was Margaret Thornberry, and she was one of the most respected arts patrons in the city, a woman whose opinion carried enormous weight in cultural circles. Margaret Thornberry began to clap. Slowly at first, each strike of her palms deliberate and loud in the silence, then faster. Then she was applauding with everything she had, her face reflecting something like awe. The spell broke. The entire audience erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the obligatory recognition of adequate performance. It was thunderous, overwhelming, genuine appreciation. People leaped to their feet. The sound of 2,000 people applauding filled the hall like a physical force. It rolled over Naomi in waves, almost knocking her backward. She stood on that stage stunned, unable to process what was happening. Bravos echoed from various parts of the hall. Men in tuxedos who had come prepared to be unimpressed were on their feet clapping until their hands hurt. Women in designer gowns were crying openly, their carefully applied makeup running. Young people were whistling and cheering. Even the orchestra members who had remained on the sides of the stage were applauding musicians, recognizing what they had just heard. In the third row, James Carter couldn't stand because his legs wouldn't support him. He sat in his seat, applauding and crying and laughing all at once. His daughter, his amazing, impossible daughter. She had done it. She had more than done it. She had conquered. Mrs. Sullivan rushed onto the stage, no longer able to contain herself. She embraced Naomi, holding her as the applause continued. "Do you hear them?" she whispered in Naomi's ear. "Do you hear what you've done?" Naomi couldn't speak. She could only stand there, held up by her teacher's embrace, as the reality of what had just happened slowly penetrated her shock. They were applauding for her. All these people, all these wealthy, educated, cultured people who weren't supposed to care about a janitor's daughter. They were on their feet for her. The applause continued for over 3 minutes, an eternity in performance time. People were calling for an encore, though Naomi hadn't prepared one. The sound was deafening, beautiful, overwhelming. It was vindication and validation and recognition all rolled into one. And in the wings, Harrison Blackwood stood with his hand pressed against the wall, steadying himself. His face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, grudging respect, and finally something that looked painfully like humiliation. Not because he had been outperformed, though in some essential way he had been, but because he had been so wrong, so dismissive, so certain that background and training mattered more than talent and heart. He had mocked this girl. He had patronized her. He had all but told her she didn't belong. And she had just proven in front of 2,000 people that she belonged more than anyone else on that stage tonight. Harrison felt something he hadn't felt in decades. He felt ashamed. The applause finally began to subside. Naomi, still held by Mrs. Sullivan, managed to gather herself enough to bow. The audience applauded again. She bowed a second time, then a third. Each time the applause renewed. Finally, reluctantly, Naomi walked off stage. The moment she was in the wings, away from the eyes of the audience, her legs gave out. Mrs. Sullivan caught her, lowering her gently to the floor. Naomi sat there, her back against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, as adrenaline and emotion overwhelmed her system. James had fought his way through the crowd. He appeared backstage, and when Naomi saw him, she stood on trembling legs and threw herself into his arms. Father and daughter held each other, both crying, both overwhelmed. "You did it, baby girl," James whispered into her hair. "You showed them. You showed all of them." "I was so scared." Daddy, Naomi sobbed. "I know, but you did it anyway. That's what courage is, being scared and doing it anyway." They stood there holding each other as people began to crowd the backstage area. Patrons who had connections, who knew their way backstage, began appearing, wanting to meet this remarkable young pianist who had moved them so profoundly. Mrs. Sullivan ran interference, giving Naomi space to collect herself. But there was one person who pushed through who needed to speak to Naomi immediately. Harrison Blackwood approached them, his face somber. James instinctively stepped between Harrison and his daughter, protective. He recognized this man, recognized the disdain that had been on his face earlier in the evening. "Mr. Carter," Harrison said quietly. "Miss Carter, I need to speak with you, please." His voice carried none of the arrogance from earlier, none of the condescension. He sounded, James realized with surprise, genuinely humble. Naomi peeked out from behind her father, her face still tear-streaked. Harrison looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I owe you an apology," he began. Harrison Blackwood stood before Naomi and her father, one of the world's most celebrated pianists, looking more uncertain than he had in decades. The backstage area bustled with activity around them, but a small bubble of quiet seemed to surround this confrontation. Mrs. Sullivan positioned herself nearby, ready to intervene if necessary. Harrison cleared his throat, struggling to find words, something that rarely happened to someone so accustomed to praise and adulation. "Miss Carter." He began, his voice quiet but clear. "I spoke to you earlier this evening, before the performance. I said things that were dismissive, condescending, and cruel. I judged you based on your background, your training, your circumstances. I made assumptions about what you could and couldn't do, based on factors that have nothing to do with talent or musicianship." He paused, his jaw working, as if the next words were physically difficult to speak. "I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong." Naomi stared at him, still pressed against her father's side. She didn't trust herself to speak. Harrison continued. "What you just did on that stage, that wasn't just good playing. That was artistry of the highest order. You moved an entire audience. You made people feel something real and true. That's what music is supposed to do, and it's something that no amount of technique or training can guarantee. You have a gift, Miss Carter. A genuine, rare, precious gift." James kept his arm protectively around his daughter, studying Harrison's face for any sign of insincerity. But what he saw there seemed genuine shame, regret, and something like wonder. "I've been playing piano for 35 years, Harrison said. "I've studied with the greatest teachers, performed in the most prestigious venues, won competitions, received accolades. And tonight, a 12-year-old girl with 3 years of lessons reminded me what music is actually about. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place before it became about perfection and competition and approval." He looked directly at Naomi now. "When I was your age, I played the way you played tonight. With my whole heart, without fear, without self-consciousness. But somewhere along the way, I lost that. I became focused on technical perfection, on impressing critics and audiences. I forgot that music is supposed to communicate something essential about human experience. You haven't forgotten that. Or maybe you never had to learn it because it's just part of who you are." Harrison's voice dropped even lower. "I'm sorry for how I spoke to you earlier. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't belong. The truth is, you belong on that stage far more than I do, because you still play with the purity and honesty that I've lost. And I'm grateful, truly grateful, that I got to hear it. Thank you for reminding me what I've been missing." The silence that followed was heavy. Naomi felt tears welling up again, but they were different tears than before. These weren't tears of fear or relief, but something more complex. Harrison Blackwood, this man who had dismissed her, who had made her feel small and inadequate, was apologizing. Genuinely apologizing. And more than that, he was praising her in a way that felt honest and earned, not patronizing or condescending. "I forgive you," Naomi heard herself say, her voice small but clear. Harrison's eyes closed briefly, as if her words had lifted a weight. "Thank you," he said softly. Then he turned to James. "Mr. Carter, you should be incredibly proud of your daughter. Not just because she's talented, but because she's brave. It takes courage to walk onto a stage when people doubt you. She has that courage because you gave it to her. That's clear in everything she does." James nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in his throat. Harrison extended his hand. James looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. "I hope Harrison said that I'll have the privilege of hearing you perform again someday, Miss Carter. Perhaps at Carnegie Hall. I have connections there, and I can't think of anyone more deserving of that stage." Before Naomi could process that statement, before she could even begin to understand what it might mean, Harrison bowed slightly, a gesture of respect from one artist to another, and stepped back into the crowd. Mrs. Sullivan immediately took his place, her face glowing with pride and vindication. "Do you understand what just happened?" she asked Naomi. "Harrison Blackwood doesn't apologize. Ever. I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him admit he was wrong about anything." Naomi shook her head, overwhelmed. "I can't believe any of this is real," she whispered. "It's real," James said, squeezing her shoulder. "It's all real, baby girl. You earned every bit of it." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More people came to congratulate Naomi, faces and names she couldn't keep track of. Wealthy patrons offered support scholarships connections. Music teachers wanted to work with her. The local newspaper's arts critic, a woman known for her harsh reviews, gushed about discovering a prodigy. Someone mentioned calls already coming in from regional media outlets wanting to cover the story of the janitor's daughter who had moved a concert hall to tears. Through it all, James stayed by Naomi's side, a steady presence, anchoring her to reality. Mrs. Sullivan managed the conversations, taking cards, making notes, protecting Naomi from being overwhelmed. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, the backstage area began to clear. The concert hall staff needed to close up. Patrons were heading to their after-parties and late dinners. The magic of the evening was slowly giving way to practical concerns. Mrs. Sullivan walked Naomi and James out through the performer's entrance, the same door they had entered hours earlier when Naomi was terrified and convinced she would embarrass herself. The night air was cool and fresh after the warmth of the concert hall. The city stretched out around them, lights, glittering cars passing the normal world, continuing its normal existence, unaware that anything significant had happened. "How are you feeling?" Mrs. Sullivan asked Naomi. Naomi considered the question. How was she feeling? Exhausted, exhilarated, confused, proud, overwhelmed. All of those things and more, a swirl of emotions too complex to name. "I feel like I just woke up from a dream," Naomi finally said. "But I'm not sure if the dream was the performance or everything that came after." Mrs. Sullivan smiled. "That's perfectly normal. What you experienced tonight, that level of performance, that level of connection with an audience, it's rare. Even for professional musicians, moments like that come maybe a handful of times in a career. You're 12 years old, and you've already experienced it. That's extraordinary. What happens now?" James asked the practical question that had been hovering in his mind. "Now," Mrs. Sullivan said, "we take it one step at a time. There will be opportunities, probably more than you can imagine, but we don't have to figure it all out tonight. Tonight you should go home, rest, and let this all sink in. We'll talk tomorrow after everyone has had time to process." She hugged Naomi tightly. "I'm so proud of you, not just for how you played, but for having the courage to walk out on that stage when you were terrified. That's what separates people who dream from people who achieve. You achieved something remarkable tonight." James shook her hand, his grip firm and grateful. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for seeing something in her. Thank you for giving her this chance. Thank you for believing in her when the rest of the world didn't. The pleasure has been entirely mine," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Teaching Naomi has been one of the great joys of my career, and I have a feeling we're just getting started." She watched as father and daughter walked toward the bus stop, their arms around each other, still processing the magnitude of what had occurred. James and Naomi rode the bus home in companionable silence. They were both too exhausted, too full of emotion to talk. When they finally reached their small apartment, James made them both hot chocolate, something he did on special occasions. They sat on their worn couch, drinking from mismatched mugs, the silence comfortable and warm. "Your mama was there tonight," James said finally. "I felt her. When you played, I swear I could feel her presence." Naomi leaned against her father's shoulder. "I felt her too," she whispered. "I played that last section for her. I wanted her to know that her love of music, that gift she gave me, it mattered. It created something beautiful." Naomi woke the next morning to the sound of her father's phone ringing. It was Mrs. Sullivan. The story had already begun to spread. The arts critic for the city's main newspaper had published her review online at midnight, and it had gone viral on social media. The headline read, "Unknown Prodigy Stops. Concert Hall. Cold 12-year-old janitor's daughter delivers performance of a lifetime." The review itself was glowing, describing Naomi's playing as a revelation and comparing her favorably to legendary pianists. By noon, the story had been picked up by regional news outlets. By evening, it was on national news. The narrative was irresistible. Young black girl from a poor background, self-taught, at first given a chance by a generous teacher, proving all doubters wrong with a stunning performance. It had every element of an inspirational story that media outlets loved. Naomi's phone, a basic model that James had given her for emergencies, began receiving calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters wanting interviews, music schools offering scholarships, organizations dedicated to supporting young musicians reaching out with resources. James, overwhelmed, called Mrs. Sullivan for guidance. She came to their apartment that afternoon, and together they began sorting through the opportunities. The most important thing Mrs. Sullivan emphasized is protecting Naomi. Yes, there are opportunities here, but she's 12 years old. She needs to remain a child, continue her education, develop at her own pace. We don't want to overwhelm her or put pressure that could damage her relationship with music. Over the next week, they carefully selected which opportunities to pursue. Naomi agreed to one television interview with a national morning show, mainly because the interviewer was known for being kind to young subjects. The segment aired 2 weeks after the concert and was viewed by millions. Naomi, slightly nervous but poised, talked about her love of music, her mother's influence, her father's support, and Mrs. Sullivan's mentorship. She thanked Harrison Blackwood for his apology and his encouragement, a moment that humanized him in the public eye, and began a subtle rehabilitation of his image. Multiple music schools offered Naomi full scholarships. After extensive discussion, it was decided that she would continue at Lincoln Middle School for her general education, but would attend a prestigious conservatory program on weekends and during summers. This would allow her to receive high-level musical training while maintaining some semblance of a normal childhood. A trust fund was established by several wealthy patrons to ensure Naomi's education would be fully funded through college, removing the financial burden from James. The Riverside Concert Hall announced a new initiative, the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program, named after Naomi's mother. The program would provide free music lessons and instrument access to children from low-income families. Mrs. Sullivan would oversee the program. The first year's funding came from donations inspired by Naomi's story. Within 6 months, 50 children were receiving lessons. Within 2 years, that number would grow to over 200. But perhaps the most significant change happened in the Carter household itself. James was offered a promotion at the concert hall. The board of directors, embarrassed that the father of their newest star had been cleaning toilets, created a position for him as facilities manager. It came with a significant pay raise, benefits, and an office. James initially resisted, uncomfortable with what felt like charity. But Mrs. Sullivan convinced him otherwise. "You've been doing the work of a facilities manager for years," she pointed out. "You know every inch of that building. You manage supplies, you coordinate with contractors. The only difference now is you'll get the title and pay you've deserved all along." James accepted. For the first time in his adult life, he had financial security. He could afford a better apartment, though they chose to stay in their old neighborhood. He could buy Naomi proper performance clothes, quality music books, anything she needed. Most importantly, he could breathe easier, no longer living paycheck to paycheck, no longer terrified that one emergency would destroy them financially. Naomi continued to practice obsessively, but now with resources that had been unimaginable before. She had access to better pianos, more instruction recordings of legendary performances to study, but Mrs. Sullivan was careful to ensure that none of this diluted what made Naomi special. That raw, emotional honesty, that ability to make music that moved people. 3 months after the spring charity concert, Naomi performed again, this time at a benefit concert for music education. The hall was packed. This time, people came specifically to hear her. The pressure was different than before, but in some ways easier. She had already proven herself. She no longer had to wonder if she belonged. She knew she did. Her performance was again stunning, bringing the audience to its feet. But there was something slightly different this time. The fear was gone, replaced by confidence. And while confidence was good, Mrs. Sullivan worried slightly about preserving the vulnerability that had made the first performance so affecting. "Don't ever lose the ability to be nervous," she told Naomi after that second concert. "Nerves mean you care. Nerves mean you're taking the performance seriously. The day you stop feeling nervous is the day you stop connecting with the audience." Naomi nodded, understanding. She didn't think she would ever stop being nervous. Even now, with success and recognition, with opportunities she had never dreamed possible, she still felt that flutter of fear before performing. And maybe that was good. Maybe that was what kept her grounded, kept her honest. 6 months after the spring charity concert, Harrison Blackwood reached out to Mrs. Sullivan with a proposition. He wanted to host a joint concert, him and Naomi performing together and separately. The proceeds would go to the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program. It would be held at Carnegie Hall. Mrs. Sullivan was skeptical at first. Was this genuine, or was Harrison trying to rehabilitate his image by associating with Naomi's success? But after several conversations, she became convinced of his sincerity. His apology that night had been real. His transformation had been real. They accepted. The announcement of a Carnegie Hall performance featuring Harrison Blackwood and Naomi Carter created significant buzz in the classical music world. Tickets sold out within hours. The concert was scheduled for the following spring, giving Naomi time to prepare. It would be the biggest stage she had ever performed on the most prestigious venue in American classical music. But somehow, after everything she had already survived, it didn't seem as terrifying as it might have before. She had already faced her worst fears and conquered them. Everything after that was just music. As the first anniversary of her initial performance approached, Naomi reflected on how completely her life had changed. She was still the same girl, still lived in the same neighborhood, still had the same father, and the same dedication to music. But the opportunities available to her, now the doors that had opened the future, that stretched before her, with possibility rather than limitation, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. One evening, sitting at the piano in their apartment, practicing on the upright that had replaced her mother's small keyboard, Naomi paused and looked at her father. "Daddy," she said, "do you think Mama would be proud?" James, who had been reading on the couch, set down his book. He came to the piano and kissed the top of Naomi's head. "Baby girl, your mama is so proud of you. She's probably bragging to every angel in heaven. Not just because you're talented, not just because you're successful, but because you stayed true to yourself. Because you remembered that music is about feeling, about heart. That's what she taught you. And that's what makes everything you do special." Naomi resumed playing a soft melody she was composing herself. Her first attempt at creating original music, rather than just interpreting others' compositions. It was tentative, exploratory, but it was hers. And in those notes, in that simple melody filling their small apartment, was everything that had happened and everything yet to come. Outside, the city continued its endless motion. Somewhere other children were discovering music for the first time, fingers touching piano keys, or plucking guitar strings, or blowing into flutes. Some would receive every advantage, every resource, every opportunity. Others would face the same obstacles Naomi had faced, the same dismissals, the same assumption that they didn't belong. But Naomi's story existed now, proof that talent and determination could overcome circumstance. Proof that artistry came from the heart, not the wallet. Proof that when given the chance, when believed in, when supported, young people from any background could achieve remarkable things. It wasn't a complete solution to inequality. One success story didn't erase systemic barriers, but it was something. It was hope. It was possibility. It was a crack in the wall that might eventually bring the whole structure down. And in the small apartment where it had all begun, where a young girl had once listened to her mother play a cheap keyboard and dreamed of making beautiful music, Naomi Carter continued to play, continued to practice, continued to prepare for whatever came next. Because this was just the beginning, the first note of a much longer composition. The opening phrase of a life dedicated to art, to expression, to using music as a force for connection and change. Naomi didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but she knew with the certainty that had carried her onto that stage, despite her terror, that she would keep walking it. One note at a time, one performance at a time, one moment of connection at a time. Spring arrived with the softness of a piano's opening note. The city transformed winter's harshness, giving way to blooming trees and warm breezes. And on a Tuesday evening in late April, 13 months after Naomi Carter had first stepped onto a stage and changed her life forever, she stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, the most legendary concert venue in America, preparing for the performance of a lifetime. Carnegie Hall, the stage where Leonard Bernstein had conducted, where Vladimir Horowitz had returned after years of retirement to thunderous acclaim, where Billie Holiday had sung, where Tchaikovsky had premiered works, where every significant classical musician had aspired to perform. And now, impossibly, Naomi was here. Not in the audience, but as a performer. At 13 years old, she would share this historic stage with Harrison Blackwood, demonstrating how far she had come and how music could bridge divides that seemed insurmountable. The intervening year had been transformative, but carefully managed. Mrs. Sullivan had been vigilant about protecting Naomi's childhood, ensuring that increased opportunities didn't translate into overwhelming pressure. Naomi attended her regular middle school, hung out with friends, did her homework. But she also practiced 4 hours a day, attended the conservatory program on weekends, and performed several times at prestigious venues. Each performance had been successful, building her reputation as a genuine prodigy rather than a one-time wonder. Her relationship with Harrison Blackwood had evolved in unexpected ways. After his public apology and the announcement of their joint concert, he had occasionally attended her performances, always staying in the background, never intruding. But after one particular concert 6 months ago, he had approached Mrs. Sullivan with a request he wanted to work with Naomi. Not teach her, he was careful to specify, but mentor her. Share with her the lessons he had learned over 3 decades of professional performance. Mrs. Sullivan had been skeptical. James had been protective. But Naomi, surprisingly, had been curious. Harrison had proven his sincerity over and over. His transformation from arrogant dismissal to genuine humility seemed authentic. And the truth was, he had knowledge and experience that could benefit her. They began meeting once a month. Harrison would fly in from wherever his performance schedule had taken him, and he would spend an afternoon with Naomi discussing not just technique, but the business of being a professional musician, the psychology of performance, the balance between artistry and career. These sessions were invaluable. Harrison taught her how to handle critics, how to deal with performance anxiety even after initial success, how to keep music fresh and meaningful after playing the same pieces hundreds of times. He shared stories of his own struggles, his own failures, the times he had let perfection become the enemy of expression. He was trying in his way to prevent Naomi from making the mistakes he had made, from losing the spark that made her special. Now, standing backstage at Carnegie Hall, those lessons felt particularly relevant. This wasn't just another performance. This was a statement. This was Naomi, a 13-year-old black girl from a working-class background, performing at the pinnacle of classical music achievement. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The hall was sold out. 2,800 people filled every seat. The crowd was more diverse than typical classical music audiences. Naomi's story had attracted people who had never attended a classical concert before, who wanted to witness this moment, who were moved by the narrative of talent overcoming adversity. But there were also the traditional classical music patrons, critics, musicians, people who knew every note of the standard repertoire and could judge performances with expert ears. The pressure was immense, but Naomi had learned to channel pressure into focus. Harrison found her in her dressing room an hour before the performance. He looked different than he had that night at the Riverside Concert Hall. Older somehow, but also lighter. The arrogance that had once defined his presence had been replaced by something gentler, wiser. "How are you feeling?" he asked. Naomi shrugged a gesture that belied her nerves, terrified and excited in equal measure. Harrison smiled. "That's exactly how you should feel. If you weren't terrified, it would mean you didn't understand the significance of tonight. But the excitement, that's what will carry you through." He sat down, his formal tails rustling. "I want to tell you something. The last time we performed together at the Riverside Hall, I was the headliner, and you were the unknown kid closing the show. I was arrogant enough to think that was the natural order of things. But tonight, Naomi, you're not opening for me. We're equals. We're two artists sharing a stage. And honestly, I'm nervous about following your performance." Naomi looked at him surprised. Harrison Blackwood nervous about following her. He saw her expression and laughed softly. "You still don't fully understand what you have, do you? You have that thing that can't be taught, can't be manufactured, can't be faked. When you play, people feel something real. That's rarer than technical perfection. That's rarer than awards or accolades. And it's what makes you one of the most compelling pianists I've heard in my entire career." He stood straightening his jacket. "Tonight, don't think about the history of this hall. Don't think about the legends who've played here. Don't think about critics or reviews or what this means for your career. Just play the way you always play with your whole heart. That's all you need to do." The concert began with Harrison's performance. He played Chopin's Polonaise Fantaisie, a work of profound complexity and emotional depth. His playing was technically perfect, as always, but there was something different about it now, something that hadn't been there before. There was vulnerability. There was emotion. The coldness that had characterized his performance a year ago at the Riverside Hall had thawed. He was playing with his heart, not just his hands. The audience responded with appropriate enthusiasm. It was a masterful performance. But everyone knew they were really there for what came next. Naomi had chosen her program carefully, working with Mrs. Sullivan to select pieces that showcased her strengths. She would play Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece that combined technical demands with profound emotional content. It was a bold choice, the same piece that had made careers and broken lesser pianists. When Harrison's applause subsided, when the stage was reset, when the moment arrived, Naomi walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage. The audience's welcome was immediate and warm. They knew her story. They wanted her to succeed. But Naomi also knew that sympathy couldn't substitute for artistry. She had to earn this moment with her playing, not with her background. She sat at the Steinway, a magnificent instrument that had been played by countless masters. She adjusted the bench, placed her hands in her lap, took the centering breath that Mrs. Sullivan had taught her. And then she began to play. The opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 is deceptively simple, a folk-like melody that introduces themes that will be transformed throughout the piece. Naomi played those opening measures with a tenderness that immediately established the emotional landscape. This wasn't going to be a performance about showing off technical prowess. This was going to be a performance about storytelling. As the piece developed, as Chopin's genius unfolded through passages of increasing complexity and passion, Naomi inhabited the music completely. She had reached a level of mastery where technique served emotion rather than the reverse. Her fingers navigated the most difficult passages with apparent ease, not because they were easy, but because she had practiced them so thoroughly that they had become automatic, allowing her mind to focus entirely on expression. The famous coda, that thundering, technically treacherous ending approached. Naomi attacked it with confidence and power, her entire body involved in producing the massive sound required. The final crashing chords rang through Carnegie Hall with perfect clarity and force. Naomi's hands came off the keys. The silence that followed was brief. Then Carnegie Hall erupted. 2,800 people rose to their feet as one. The ovation was deafening, sustained, genuine. Critics who had come prepared to be impressed but skeptical found themselves wiping their eyes. Musicians in the audience recognized that they had witnessed something special. And in the fourth row, James Carter stood with tears streaming down his face, applauding until his hands ached. His daughter, on the Carnegie Hall stage, receiving a standing ovation. It was impossible. It was real. It was everything. Naomi bowed, overwhelmed once again by the response. She had performed dozens of times now since that first night at the Riverside Hall, but this feeling never got old. The connection with an audience, the sense of having communicated something essential, it remained as powerful as it had been the first time. She bowed again, then gestured to Mrs. Sullivan, who was sitting in the front row. Mrs. Sullivan stood accepting the applause directed at her, the mentor who had seen potential and nurtured it into brilliance. Backstage after the concert concluded, after the final bows, after Harrison had performed a virtuosic encore that nonetheless felt slightly anticlimactic after Naomi's emotional journey, the dressing room was chaos. Flowers, congratulations, people wanting to meet her, to touch her, to be part of this moment. James and Mrs. Sullivan formed a protective barrier managing the crowd. Harrison appeared, and the room quieted slightly. He approached Naomi, who was still in her performance dress, still processing what had just happened. "You did it," he said simply. "You played Carnegie Hall, and you conquered it." "We both did," Naomi said generously. Harrison shook his head. "No, Naomi, tonight was yours. My performance was technically proficient. Yours was transcendent. There's a difference, and everyone in that hall knew it." He extended his hand. "Thank you for sharing this stage with me. Thank you for reminding me why music matters. And thank you for proving that talent and heart will always triumph over privilege and prejudice. You've changed the conversation about classical music. You've made it more inclusive, more human, more vital. That's a gift you've given all of us." They shook hands, artist to artist equals in the truest sense. The New York Times review the next morning was glowing, calling Naomi's performance a revelation and comparing her favorably to legendary pianists. The review went viral. Suddenly, Naomi wasn't just a feel-good story. She was recognized as a legitimate, significant artist in her own right. Opportunities multiplied. Offers to perform at major venues around the world, recording contracts, endorsement deals, all of it carefully vetted by Mrs. Sullivan and James, who remained vigilant about protecting Naomi's well-being and childhood. But with success came challenges that no one had fully anticipated. The pressure of expectations, the loss of anonymity, the complexity of being a role model at 13 years old. Naomi struggled with these new aspects of her life, sometimes feeling overwhelmed, sometimes wishing she could just be a normal teenager. Mrs. Sullivan and James worked hard to maintain balance, to ensure that music remained a joy rather than a burden. They turned down more opportunities than they accepted. They prioritized Naomi's mental health and happiness over career advancement. They remembered that she was a child first, a musician second. 2 years after her initial performance at the Riverside Concert Hall, Naomi returned to where it all began. The concert hall hosted an anniversary benefit concert celebrating the success of the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program and honoring the moment that had transformed so many lives. The evening would conclude with Naomi performing the same piece she had played that first night, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Third Movement. It felt appropriate coming full circle, returning to the place and the piece that had started everything. But everything was different now. Naomi was 14, taller, more confident, with dozens of successful performances behind her. She was no longer the terrified 12-year-old wondering if she belonged. She knew she belonged. The question now was how to honor that younger version of herself, while also acknowledging how much she had grown. The hall was packed with familiar faces. The wealthy patrons who had been there for that first performance, many of whom had become supporters of the scholarship program. Mrs. Sullivan, of course, seated in her usual spot. Harrison Blackwood, who had become an unlikely friend and mentor. And James, sitting in that same third-row seat wearing a suit now, instead of his pressed JCPenney shirt, but with the same expression of pride and love. Before Naomi performed, there was a ceremony acknowledging the scholarship program's impact. 57 children had received comprehensive music education over the past 2 years. Several of them performed that evening, showcasing the talent that had been nurtured by the program. Watching these kids, many from backgrounds similar to her own, Naomi felt a profound sense of purpose. Her success wasn't just about her anymore. It had become something larger, a catalyst for change, an inspiration for others who had been told they didn't belong. When it was finally time for Naomi to perform, she walked onto the stage with none of the terror she had felt 2 years ago. But she also carried something heavier responsibility: the weight of expectations, the knowledge that she represented something larger than herself. She sat at the piano the same Steinway she had played before and allowed herself to remember that night. The fear, the humiliation, the determination, the triumph. All of it flooded back, as vivid as if it were happening again. She began to play. The opening measures of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata emerged from the piano with crystal clarity. But something was different this time. 2 years of additional training, of performing, of maturing had refined her technique. The passages that had been challenging before now flowed with easier confidence. The voicing was more sophisticated. The dynamic contrasts were more controlled. Technically, this performance was superior to her first one, but Sullivan, listening intently, felt a small pang. The raw emotion of that first performance, the sense of a young girl pouring her entire heart into music because she had no other choice, because it was the only way to prove her worth, that specific quality was slightly muted. Not gone, but tempered by experience and success. It was the inevitable trade-off. Technical mastery often came at the cost of that raw, unfiltered emotion that made the first performance so powerful. Naomi felt it too. Midway through the piece, she realized she was playing beautifully but safely. She was executing the notes perfectly, but she wasn't taking risks. She wasn't leaving herself vulnerable the way she had before. And in that moment, she made a choice. She stopped trying to play perfectly. She stopped worrying about what the audience thought, about living up to her reputation, about being the prodigy everyone expected. She simply played the way she had learned from her mother, from Mrs. Sullivan, from her own experience. She played with her heart. The final section of the piece transformed. Suddenly, there it was again, that quality that had made her first performance so special. The vulnerability, the emotional honesty, the sense that music was communication, not performance. By the time Naomi played the final crashing chord, tears were streaming down her face. Not tears of fear or relief, but tears of pure emotion, of connecting with something greater than herself. The audience's response was immediate and overwhelming. Another standing ovation, another moment of recognition. But for Naomi, the applause was secondary. What mattered was that she had rediscovered something she was afraid she had lost: the ability to be truly present in the music, to let it move through her rather than trying to control it. Backstage, James embraced his daughter tightly. "That was beautiful, baby girl. And you know what made it beautiful? You stopped trying to be perfect and just let yourself feel. That's when the magic happens." Naomi nodded against his chest. She understood now, in a way she hadn't before, what her mother had meant all those years ago. Music isn't about how much you know. It's about how much you feel. Technical mastery was important, but it was a tool, not the goal. The goal was connection, communication, touching something essential in yourself and your audience. Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed, after the congratulations, and the photos and the interviews, Naomi found herself alone on the stage of the Riverside Concert Hall. The house lights were dim, the seats were empty. It was just her and the piano, and the memories of where it had all begun. She sat at the Steinway and played softly, not any particular piece, just improvising, letting her fingers wander across the keys. She thought about her mother, about Sarah Carter, who had loved music but never had the opportunities Naomi now had. She thought about her father, about all the sacrifices he had made, all the doors he had cleaned, for all the dignity he had maintained, despite a world that often didn't value his work. She thought about Mrs. Sullivan, who had seen potential in a scared little girl and had chosen to nurture it rather than dismiss it. She thought about Harrison Blackwood, who had been humbled enough to apologize and had become an unexpected ally. She thought about all the children in the scholarship program, all the kids who would now have chances they wouldn't have had otherwise. And she thought about herself, about the journey from that terrified 12-year-old to the young artist she was becoming. The music she played was melancholy and beautiful, a reflection of gratitude and growth. It filled the empty hall, echoing off walls that had heard so much music, so many stories. And in that moment, alone with her thoughts and her instrument, Naomi understood something profound. Success wasn't measured in standing ovations or reviews or opportunities, though those were wonderful. Success was measured in staying true to yourself, in using your gifts to make the world slightly better, in remembering where you came from while reaching for where you wanted to go. "Thank you, Naomi," whispered to the empty hall, to her mother's memory, to everyone who had helped her along the way. "Thank you for giving me this." The piano's notes faded into silence. Naomi stood, walked off the stage, and stepped into the rest of her life, carrying with her the lessons of the past and the possibilities of the future. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more performances, more opportunities to succeed and fail and learn and grow. But Naomi Carter, daughter of a janitor student of music artist in the truest sense, was ready. The moment after Naomi's performance at the anniversary concert would become one of the defining images of her early career. A photographer from the local newspaper captured it, Naomi standing beside the Steinway, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped together, while behind her the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that seemed to make the very walls of the concert hall vibrate. The photograph would appear in newspapers and magazines, would be shared thousands of times on social media, would become emblematic of her story. But for Naomi, standing in that moment, the photograph couldn't capture what she was actually feeling. It wasn't just pride or relief or happiness, though all of those emotions were present. It was something more complex, a sense of having completed a circle, of having returned to where it all began, and finding that both she and the place had been transformed. The scared 12-year-old who had walked onto this stage 2 years ago had grown into a confident young artist. And the concert hall that had once felt like a space where she didn't belong now felt like home. Margaret Thornberry, the elegant patron who had been the first to stand and applaud at Naomi's initial performance, was again on her feet, applauding with tears in her eyes. She had become one of the largest donors to the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program, contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure its continuation and expansion. Her own journey of transformation, from someone who had viewed classical music as the province of the privileged to someone who understood that talent could emerge from anywhere, mirrored the larger cultural shift that Naomi's success had catalyzed. In the wings, Mrs. Sullivan stood with her hand pressed to her heart, overwhelmed by pride and emotion. She had dedicated her life to music education, had worked with hundreds of students over 4 decades, had celebrated countless successes. But this was different. This was watching someone she had mentored from those first tentative notes transform into a genuine artist, someone who wasn't just technically proficient, but who understood music as a form of human connection. This was validation of everything she believed about the democratization of art, about the importance of providing opportunities regardless of background. Harrison Blackwood, standing near the back of the hall, applauded with genuine enthusiasm. His own transformation over the past 2 years had been significant. Working with Naomi, mentoring her, watching her navigate the classical music world with grace and authenticity, had forced him to confront aspects of himself he had long ignored. He had reconnected with why he had started playing piano in the first place, had softened his approach to performance, had become a vocal advocate for diversity and inclusion in classical music. His career hadn't suffered. If anything, his performances had become more emotionally resonant, more human. Critics noted the change, praising his newfound depth. The applause continued for over 4 minutes, an eternity in performance time. Naomi bowed repeatedly each time, feeling a fresh wave of gratitude wash over her. She gestured to Mrs. Sullivan, bringing her onto the stage to share the moment. She gestured to her father, though James remained in his seat, too overwhelmed to move, applauding with his whole heart. Finally, as the ovation began to subside, Naomi approached the microphone that had been set up on the stage. The hall quieted immediately, everyone eager to hear what she would say. "Thank you," Naomi began, her voice soft but clear. "2 years ago, I stood on this stage absolutely terrified, convinced I was about to embarrass myself and everyone who believed in me. I was 12 years old, the daughter of the man who cleaned this building, and I thought that meant I didn't belong here. But I was wrong. I did belong here. Not because of where I came from, but because of what I carried inside me. A love of music that my mother gave me, a work ethic that my father modeled, and a gift that Mrs. Sullivan helped me develop. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Tonight I played the same piece I played 2 years ago. But I'm not the same person. I've learned so much, performed in places I never dreamed possible. Met incredible people, had opportunities that seemed impossible. And through all of it, I've tried to remember what my mother told me when I was little, that music isn't about how much you know, it's about how much you feel. Tonight I tried to feel every note to honor not just Beethoven's genius, but the journey that brought me here. Naomi looked out at the audience, at all the faces watching her. There are kids in this audience tonight who are here because of the scholarship program. Kids who, like me, love music but don't have the resources to pursue it. I want you all to know something: you belong here. Your background doesn't determine your worth. Your zip code doesn't limit your potential. If you have talent and you're willing to work hard, you can achieve things that seem impossible. I'm proof of that, and I promise you I will do everything I can to make sure that other kids get the same chances I got. The applause erupted again, even louder than before. Naomi stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed by the response. She had spoken from the heart without a prepared speech, simply saying what she felt needed to be said. And the audience had heard her, had understood the message beneath the words, that art should be accessible to everyone, that talent exists in every community, that supporting young artists was an investment in humanity's future. As Naomi left the stage for the final time that evening, she felt a sense of completion. This chapter of her life, the chapter that had begun with fear and humiliation and had transformed into triumph and opportunity, was closing. New chapters would open with their own challenges and rewards. But this moment, this return to where it all started, felt like the perfect way to honor the past while stepping into the future. The standing ovation faded. The audience began to file out, many stopping to sign up for the scholarship program mailing list to make donations to commit to supporting young musicians. The concert hall slowly emptied, returning to its normal state of elegant silence. But the impact of the evening would continue to ripple outward, touching lives, changing perspectives, creating opportunities. Art had done what art does best. It had connected people across divides, had reminded them of shared humanity, had demonstrated that beauty and talent could emerge from anywhere, anytime, if given the chance to flourish. In the weeks following the anniversary concert, Harrison Blackwood found himself thinking often about the journey of the past 2 years. His public apology to Naomi, delivered backstage at the Riverside Concert Hall in a moment of genuine humility, had been a turning point, not just in their relationship, but in his own life. What had begun as an uncomfortable acknowledgement of his prejudice and arrogance had evolved into something much more significant, a complete reassessment of his values and priorities. Harrison had grown up in privilege, the son of a successful investment banker and a socialite mother. He had attended the finest schools, studied with the most prestigious teachers, had never wanted for resources or opportunities. His talent was genuine and substantial, but it had been nurtured in a greenhouse of advantage. He had never had to struggle, never had to prove himself against skepticism or prejudice, never had to wonder if he would get opportunities. They had always been there, handed to him by virtue of his background. This upbringing had created blind spots, assumptions about merit and worth that he had never questioned. He had believed at some fundamental level that people like him deserved their success, while people from less privileged backgrounds were somehow less capable, less deserving. Naomi had shattered those assumptions so completely that Harrison had been forced to rebuild his entire worldview. In the 2 years since that initial encounter, Harrison had become an active advocate for diversifying classical music. He used his platform to speak about the importance of accessible music education. He donated significant portions of his concert fees to scholarship programs. He made a point of attending performances by young artists from underrepresented backgrounds, lending his credibility to their efforts. But more than these external changes, something internal had shifted. Harrison had reconnected with the joy of music making rather than the pursuit of perfection and acclaim. His performances, while still technically brilliant, had gained emotional depth they had previously lacked. Critics noticed and appreciated the change. Audiences responded more warmly. And Harrison himself found more satisfaction in his art than he had in years. His relationship with Naomi had evolved into a genuine mentorship based on mutual respect rather than condescension. Once a month, when their schedules allowed, they would meet to discuss music performance, the business of being an artist. Harrison shared hard-won wisdom about navigating the classical music world, about dealing with pressure and criticism, about maintaining artistic integrity while building a career. Naomi, in turn, reminded Harrison of what he had lost along the way, the ability to play with unguarded emotion, to take risks, to value connection over perfection. Their most recent conversation had taken place just a week after the anniversary concert. They sat in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby, both having performed at a benefit concert the previous evening. Harrison stirred his coffee absently, watching Naomi review sheet music for an upcoming performance. "You know," he said, "I think about that night at the Riverside Hall all the time. The way I spoke to you, the assumptions I made. It makes me deeply uncomfortable." Naomi looked up from her music. "You apologized, Harrison. You've more than made amends. You've become a completely different person." "Have I thought?" Harrison set down his coffee cup. "Or have I just become more aware of who I always was underneath the arrogance? Maybe the person I am now is who I should have been all along, and meeting you just forced me to confront the gap between those two versions of myself." "Does it matter?" Naomi asked gently. "Whether you changed or revealed your true self, the result is the same. You're using your platform to help others now. You're making classical music more inclusive. You're supporting young artists. Those are real actions with real impact." Harrison nodded slowly. "I suppose. But I think often about the kids I might have discouraged over the years before I met you. The young musicians I dismissed because they didn't fit my narrow idea of what a serious artist looked like. I wonder how much talent I was blind to, how many opportunities I failed to support, all because I couldn't see past my own privilege." "You can't change the past," Naomi said, "but you can influence the future. And you are. The scholarship program wouldn't have the funding it does without your support. Young musicians wouldn't have the opportunities they now have without your advocacy. That matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Harrison finally spoke again, his voice quiet. "Thank you for forgiving me. I'm not sure I deserved it, but I'm grateful for it nonetheless." "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption," Naomi said. "You taught me that, actually. Not through your words, but through your actions. You showed me that people can change, can grow, can overcome their own blind spots if they're willing to do the work. That's valuable." Harrison smiled, a genuine expression, without any of the condescension that had once characterized his demeanor. "You're wise beyond your years, Naomi. Don't lose that wisdom as you get older. The classical music world can be cynical, competitive, petty. It can make you hard if you let it. Stay soft, stay open, stay committed to using your gift to connect with people rather than impress them. "I'll try," Naomi promised. "And you keep trying too. Keep working to open doors for kids who look like me, who come from backgrounds like mine. We need people with your platform speaking out, making it clear that classical music belongs to everyone, not just the privileged few." The conversation had stayed with Harrison in the days since. Redemption, Naomi had called it. The idea that people could fundamentally change, could overcome their own failures and become better versions of themselves. Harrison wanted to believe it. He wanted to believe that his transformation was real and lasting, that he wouldn't slip back into old patterns of thinking and behaving. But he also knew that change required constant vigilance. It was easy to support diversity and inclusion in the abstract. It was harder to confront your own biases in the moment, to check your assumptions, to extend opportunities to people who didn't fit the traditional mold. Harrison committed himself to that ongoing work, knowing it would never be finished, knowing he would stumble and fail sometimes, but believing it was worth the effort. In a profile published in a major classical music magazine, Harrison spoke openly about his encounter with Naomi and how it had changed him. "I met a 12-year-old girl who was a better musician and a better person than I was," he said in the interview. "She showed me that talent and heart matter more than pedigree and training. She reminded me why music exists, not to separate us into categories of worthy and unworthy, but to connect us through shared human experience. I owe her more than I can ever repay." The article created significant discussion in the classical music world. Some praised Harrison's honesty and growth. Others were more skeptical, viewing his transformation as performative or self-serving. But the concrete results of his advocacy were undeniable. Scholarship programs expanded. Audition processes became more equitable. Conversations about diversity and inclusion in classical music became more common and more substantive. Change was happening slowly but steadily. And while it would be an overstatement to credit Harrison alone for these shifts, his voice and platform had certainly contributed to momentum that was building across the field. One evening, attending a performance by a young violinist from a low-income background who had received a scholarship, Harrison found himself reflecting on how far he had come. 2 years ago, he might have dismissed this performance as a feel-good story without artistic merit. Now he sat in the audience, genuinely moved by the young musician's passion and skill, recognizing the journey represented by every note. This was what redemption looked like. Not a single moment of apology or transformation, but an ongoing commitment to being better, seeing clearer, supporting more generously. It was work that would last the rest of his life. And thanks to a 12-year-old girl who had refused to be diminished by his arrogance, Harrison finally understood that the work was worth doing. The months following Naomi's anniversary concert brought changes that reverberated through multiple lives. For the Carter family, the transformation was perhaps most pronounced. James's promotion to facilities manager had provided financial stability, but the opportunities that followed Naomi's success brought something even more valuable: options. For the first time in his adult life, James could make choices based on what he wanted rather than what he needed. The Carters moved to a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. Not ostentatious, but with reliable heat-updated appliances and a dedicated space where Naomi could practice without disturbing neighbors. James insisted on staying in a working-class area, not wanting to lose connection with the community that had shaped them. The apartment had a small balcony where James would sit in the evenings drinking coffee and watching the sunset, still marveling at how completely his life had changed. But perhaps the most significant change for James was internal. For years he had carried a quiet shame about his work, not because cleaning was dishonorable, but because society treated it as such. People looked through him, dismissed him, made assumptions about his intelligence and worth based on his job title. Naomi's success had shifted that dynamic in unexpected ways. Now, when James attended concerts or events, people sought him out. They wanted to hear about raising a prodigy, about his perspective on Naomi's journey, about his own story. At first, James was uncomfortable with this attention. He was a private man, not given to self-promotion or storytelling. But Mrs. Sullivan convinced him that his story mattered, that other parents in similar situations needed to hear from someone who had navigated these waters. James began occasionally speaking at community events about supporting your children's dreams, even when resources are limited, about the dignity of all work, about the importance of believing in potential over pedigree. These speaking engagements terrified him initially. Public speaking had never been his strength. But over time, James found his voice learned to share his experiences in ways that resonated with audiences. He talked about the nights he had worried about money, about the pain of not being able to provide everything he wanted for his daughter, about the fear that she would be judged by his job rather than her talent. And he talked about the joy of watching her prove everyone wrong, about the pride of seeing her thrive, about the vindication of knowing that love and support mattered more than money or status. For Naomi, the changes were even more dramatic. Her schedule became packed with performances, interviews, recording sessions, and conservatory studies. Mrs. Sullivan and James carefully managed these commitments, ensuring that Naomi still had time for regular school friends and just being a teenager. But the balance was delicate. There were mornings when Naomi woke up exhausted, when the pressure of expectations felt crushing, when she longed for the simplicity of her pre-fame life. Mrs. Sullivan, recognizing the signs of potential burnout, instituted mandatory downtime. One weekend a month, Naomi was completely off. No practice, no performances, no interviews. Just being a teenage girl, hanging out with friends, going to movies, doing normal things. These breaks were essential for maintaining Naomi's mental health and keeping her relationship with music positive. The scholarship program, named after Naomi's mother, expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as a local initiative providing lessons to 50 children grew into a regional program serving over 200 students. The waiting list was hundreds of names long. The success of the program attracted attention from national foundations and wealthy donors who wanted to support similar initiatives in other cities. Mrs. Sullivan, who had taken on leadership of the program alongside her role at the concert hall, worked tirelessly to maintain quality while scaling up. She hired additional teachers, secured more practice space, developed curriculum, and created pathways for students to transition from the program to advanced study. Many of the program's first students, now teenagers, were winning local and regional competitions, earning scholarships to music schools, pursuing professional careers. The ripple effects of Naomi's initial success were multiplying exponentially. The media attention surrounding Naomi's story also catalyzed broader conversations about access to arts education. School districts that had cut music programs began reinstating them. Community centers added music classes. Instrument donation programs expanded. Politicians cited Naomi's story when advocating for arts funding. While one person's success couldn't single-handedly solve systemic inequalities, it had created momentum for change that was larger than any individual. But success came with complications. Naomi received thousands of messages from aspiring young musicians, many asking for advice, support, or opportunities. While she wanted to help everyone, it was impossible. Mrs. Sullivan helped her develop strategies for responding thoughtfully to some messages while acknowledging that she couldn't personally assist everyone who reached out. This was hard for Naomi, who remembered how much Mrs. Sullivan's support had meant to her and wanted to provide similar support to others. There were also uncomfortable moments when Naomi's success was weaponized against other struggling people. Some would point to her story as evidence that anyone could succeed if they just worked hard enough, ignoring the role of luck, timing, and exceptional circumstances in her journey. Naomi pushed back against this narrative whenever possible, emphasizing that her story was exceptional, precisely because it was so rare that most talented kids from poor backgrounds never got the chances she did, that systemic change required more than individual success stories. The Riverside Concert Hall itself was transformed by Naomi's impact. Attendance at performances increased particularly among younger and more diverse audiences who had been inspired by her story. The hall developed new programming specifically designed to be accessible to people from all backgrounds, with discounted tickets, family-friendly performances, and educational initiatives. The institution recognized that Naomi's success had given them an opportunity to live up to ideals they had previously only paid lip service to, and they were working to honor that responsibility. For all the positive changes, there were also losses. Naomi's friendships from before her success strained under the weight of her new fame and busy schedule. Some friends were supportive, but gradually drifted away as they no longer shared common experiences. Others became resentful or jealous. Naomi worked hard to maintain connections with her oldest friends, but it was difficult when she was traveling for performances or buried in practice while they were hanging out at the mall or going to parties. There were also the inevitable critics and skeptics. Some questioned whether Naomi was really as talented as the hype suggested, or whether her success was primarily driven by her compelling backstory. Music critics occasionally published reviews that, while generally positive, included subtle suggestions that she was being graded on a curve, that expectations were lowered because of her background. These criticisms stung, even though Naomi knew they were often rooted in bias. She worked even harder to prove that her success was based on merit, not sympathy. Through all these changes and challenges, the core relationship between Naomi and her father remained constant. Every evening when Naomi got home, no matter how late, no matter how exhausted, James would make them both hot chocolate, and they would sit on their small balcony talking about the day. These quiet moments of connection, away from the pressures and expectations and complications, grounded Naomi and reminded her what truly mattered: family authenticity, staying true to herself. "Are you happy, baby girl?" James asked one evening during one of these conversations. Naomi considered the question carefully. "I think so," she finally said. "It's complicated. I love performing. I love that I get to make music for a living. I love that the scholarship program is helping other kids. But sometimes I miss being nobody, you know. I miss when I could make mistakes without everyone analyzing them. I miss when music was just for me." James nodded, understanding. "That's the price of success, I suppose. The thing you love becomes bigger than just personal satisfaction. It becomes a responsibility, an expectation, a public commodity. That's a heavy burden for anyone, let alone a 14-year-old. "How do I balance it?" Naomi asked. "How do I keep music feeling like mine, while also accepting that it's become something bigger?" "I don't know if you can balance it," James admitted. "Maybe you just have to accept that both things are true at the same time. Music is yours, your personal joy and expression. But it's also a gift you share with the world, something bigger than yourself. Both things can exist simultaneously." Naomi leaned against her father's shoulder, finding comfort in his steady presence. Despite all the changes, despite the fame and opportunities and complications, she was still his daughter, and he was still her anchor to reality. That hadn't changed. and as long as that remained true, Naomi believed she could navigate whatever came next. 3 years after Naomi's initial performance at the Riverside Concert Hall, the Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program had become a model for arts education initiatives nationwide. What had started as a local effort to provide music lessons to disadvantaged children had evolved into something much more comprehensive and impactful. The program now operated in 12 cities across the country, serving over 800 students annually. More significantly, it had catalyzed broader conversations about accessibility in classical music and the arts more generally. Universities and conservatories began examining their admission and scholarship processes, recognizing that talent often went undiscovered in communities that lacked resources. Several prestigious schools implemented programs specifically designed to identify and support promising young musicians from low-income backgrounds. These weren't charity cases or diversity initiatives for the sake of optics. They were genuine efforts to tap into pools of talent that had been systematically overlooked. The classical music industry itself was slowly changing. Orchestras began hosting free community concerts in neighborhoods that had never had access to live classical music. Concert halls developed sliding-scale ticket pricing so that attending a performance wasn't limited to the wealthy. Youth orchestras expanded their recruitment efforts beyond private schools and affluent suburbs. These changes were incremental and imperfect, but they represented a meaningful shift in mindset. Naomi's story had become a case study in music education programs and cultural policy discussions. Academic papers analyzed the factors that contributed to her success: early exposure to music, through her mother's hands-on access to quality instruments, through her father's workplace identification and mentorship by a skilled teacher, personal determination and talent, and the platform provided by that initial performance. Researchers noted that while Naomi's individual talent was exceptional, each of the other factors could be systemically addressed through proper policy and resource allocation. This research led to specific recommendations that some districts and institutions began implementing. Schools in low-income areas received funding for music programs and quality instruments. Partnerships were developed between concert halls and schools, providing students with exposure to professional performances and musicians. Mentorship programs connected established artists with promising young students. After-school music centers were established in underserved communities, providing free access to instruction and practice space. The impact extended beyond just music education. Naomi's story was used in broader discussions about educational equity, talent development, and social mobility. It illustrated how systemic barriers prevented many talented individuals from reaching their potential, and how relatively modest interventions properly designed and implemented could create opportunities that transformed lives. Politicians referenced the scholarship program when advocating for arts funding. Philanthropists cited it as an example of effective giving that created lasting impact. But perhaps most significantly, Naomi's success and the scholarship program bearing her mother's name had changed the cultural narrative about who belonged in classical music. For decades, classical music had been perceived and had often marketed itself as an elite pursuit, the province of the wealthy and educated. This perception had been self-fulfilling, keeping many talented people from even attempting to enter the field. Naomi's story challenged that narrative directly. Here was a girl from a working-class background, daughter of a janitor, who had become one of the most celebrated young pianists in the country. Her success demonstrated that talent existed everywhere, and that classical music could be for everyone, not just the privileged few. This shift was reflected in changing demographics of concert audiences and music students. More diverse faces appeared in conservatory classes, orchestra auditions, and performance venues. Young people who might never have considered classical music as a viable path were now seeing it as a possibility. Parents from all backgrounds were more willing to encourage their children's musical interests, understanding that success was achievable even without wealth or connections. The changes weren't universal or complete. Significant barriers remained. Many talented young people still lacked access to instruments instruction or opportunities. Racism, classism, and other forms of discrimination continued to shape who succeeded and who didn't. The classical music world was still disproportionately white and wealthy. But the conversation had changed. The possibility of a more inclusive, accessible classical music world was now part of mainstream discourse rather than a radical fringe position. Mrs. Sullivan, now in her mid-60s and thinking about eventual retirement, reflected often on how one chance encounter had reshaped her life's work. Finding Naomi playing piano on that stage 3 years ago had been fortuitous, but choosing to mentor her rather than reprimand her had been a conscious decision, one that had paid dividends beyond anything she could have imagined. The scholarship program would be her legacy, ensuring that future generations of talented young people would receive the support she had given Naomi. The concert hall itself had been transformed. Once seen primarily as a venue for the elite, it now actively worked to be a community resource. Free concerts, educational programs, partnerships with schools, accessible ticket pricing. These initiatives had made the hall relevant and vital to the entire city, rather than just its wealthy patrons. Attendance had actually increased as the audience base diversified, defying predictions that catering to broader audiences would alienate traditional supporters. The board of directors, initially skeptical of some changes, now embraced them fully, recognizing both the moral imperative and the practical benefits. Corporate sponsors and wealthy donors continued to support the scholarship program and related initiatives. Some were motivated by genuine belief in the mission. Others saw PR benefits in being associated with such a positive, inspirational story. Mrs. Sullivan accepted support from both groups pragmatically, understanding that impact mattered more than motivation. As long as the money went to providing opportunities for deserving kids, she didn't particularly care whether donors were acting from altruism or enlightened self-interest. The program had developed a robust infrastructure to ensure sustainability beyond Naomi's personal story. While her success had catalyzed the initial support and attention, the program now stood on its own merits, with data demonstrating its effectiveness, a clear operational structure, and a dedicated fundraising apparatus. This was intentional. Mrs. Sullivan had worked hard to ensure that the scholarship program wouldn't collapse if public interest in Naomi waned. The kids being served deserved stability and long-term support, not just temporary attention driven by one person's fame. 3 years after that first performance, over 50 students who had gone through the program were now studying music at colleges and conservatories on scholarship. 5 had won major youth competitions. Dozens more were developing their skills, nurturing their talents, pursuing dreams that wouldn't have been possible without the support they received. Each of these students represented not just individual success, but systemic change proof that when barriers were removed and opportunities provided, talent flourished, and the ripple effects continued to spread. Students who had been inspired by Naomi's story but weren't in the scholarship program still pursued music motivated by her example. Teachers incorporated her story into lessons about perseverance and following your passion. Community organizations used the scholarship program as a model for their own initiatives in sports, visual arts, theater, and other fields. The impact couldn't be fully quantified, but it was real and substantial. Naomi herself remained actively involved with the program, visiting classes, performing at fundraising events, mentoring students when her schedule allowed. She understood that she had a responsibility to pay forward the support she had received. But she was also careful not to let the program define her entirely. She was an artist first, an advocate second. She couldn't let the weight of representation and responsibility crush the joy that made her artistry possible in the first place. The long-term impact of Naomi's success would take decades to fully understand. But 3 years in it was clear that something significant had shifted. Classical music was becoming slightly more democratic, slightly more accessible, slightly more reflective of the broader society it existed within. The work was far from complete, but the direction was right. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Naomi's story had illustrated talent exists everywhere, and given proper support and opportunity, it can flourish in ways that enrich everyone. At 15 years old, Naomi Carter stood at a crossroads in her young career. She had achieved more than most musicians accomplish in a lifetime. Performances at the world's most prestigious venues, a recording contract, widespread recognition, and the satisfaction of knowing her success had created opportunities for hundreds of other young musicians. But the question that occupied her thoughts during quiet moments was no longer, "Can I succeed?" but rather, "What do I want success to look like?" The classical music establishment had clear expectations for her trajectory. Continue performing at major venues, record albums of standard repertoire, build a traditional concert career, become a respected interpreter of the masters. This was the path that artists like Harrison Blackwood had followed, and it led to stability, recognition, and respect within the field. But Naomi was increasingly drawn to something different, something that felt more authentic to her own identity and values. She had started composing her own music, tentative at first, but with growing confidence. These weren't adaptations of classical pieces or exercises in traditional forms. They were original compositions that blended classical training with other influences, jazz, gospel, hip-hop, the music of her community and generation. When she played these pieces for Mrs. Sullivan, her teacher's reaction was thoughtful rather than immediately enthusiastic. "These are interesting," Mrs. Sullivan said diplomatically. "But you should understand that original composition, especially in non-traditional styles, is risky. It could limit your opportunities in classical music circles." "Maybe I don't want to stay in classical music circles," Naomi replied, surprising herself with the statement. "Maybe I want to create something new, something that speaks to kids like me who love music but don't see themselves in traditional classical contexts." Mrs. Sullivan recognized the conviction in Naomi's voice. She also recognized, with a mixture of pride and melancholy, that her student was outgrowing her mentorship. "If that's the path you want to pursue, I'll support you," she said. "But know that it will be harder in some ways than following a traditional trajectory. You'll face criticism from purists. You'll be told you're wasting your training. But if you stay true to your artistic vision, you could also create something genuinely innovative and important." This conversation catalyzed a period of intense reflection for Naomi. She began experimenting more boldly with composition, creating pieces that defied easy categorization. She reached out to musicians in other genres, exploring collaborations that would have been unthinkable in traditional classical contexts. She performed her original compositions alongside standard classical repertoire, watching audiences' reactions, noting that younger listeners especially responded enthusiastically to her innovative work. James watched his daughter's evolution with fascination and some concern. He wanted her to be happy and fulfilled, but he also worried about the risks of deviating from a proven path. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one evening. "You've worked so hard to succeed in classical music. You've achieved so much. Are you willing to risk that to try something new? Naomi thought carefully before responding. I'm not risking it, Daddy. I'm building on it. Everything I learned from classical training, all the technique and discipline and understanding of music theory, that's the foundation. But I don't want to spend my life just interpreting dead composers' work. I want to create something of my own, something that speaks to this moment, to my generation, to my experience. Your mama would have loved that, James said quietly. She never had formal training, but she understood that music was about expression, not just preservation. She would have encouraged you to create your own voice. This affirmation gave Naomi confidence to pursue her vision more boldly. She began work on an album that would include both classical works and original compositions. Record label executives were skeptical, initially worried that such a hybrid approach would confuse audiences and limit commercial success. But Naomi was adamant, and eventually she found a label willing to take the risk. At 16, Naomi performed a concert that signaled her evolving artistic identity. The program included Beethoven and Chopin, alongside 3 of her original compositions. The classical music critics were mixed in their response, some praising her ambition, while others criticized what they saw as abandoning her roots. But younger critics and audiences enthusiastically embraced the performance, excited to see classical music evolving and engaging with contemporary culture. This concert marked a turning point. Naomi began to envision a future where she could bridge worlds rather than choosing between them. She could honor her classical training while also creating music that reflected her own experiences and spoke to contemporary audiences. She could be both a classical pianist and a composer, both an interpreter and an innovator. The path forward became clearer. Naomi would continue studying classical music, deepening her technical skills and understanding of the tradition. But she would also study composition, jazz, harmony, music, production, anything that would allow her to develop her own artistic voice. She would perform in traditional venues, but also in clubs, festivals, and spaces where diverse audiences gathered. She would collaborate with artists from different genres, creating music that crossed boundaries and challenged categories. This vision was ambitious and uncertain. There was no clear template for the kind of career Naomi was imagining, but that was precisely what made it exciting. She had already proven that she didn't have to follow traditional paths to succeed. Her entire story had been about defying expectations and creating opportunities that didn't previously exist. Why should her future be any different? Mrs. Sullivan, watching her former student chart her own course, felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her wished Naomi would pursue a more traditional classical career, cementing her place in that world. But a larger part recognized that Naomi was doing exactly what she should be doing, using her gifts to create something new and meaningful, rather than simply replicating what had come before. You're going to create your own category, Mrs. Sullivan told Naomi during one of their last formal lessons. You're not going to be just a classical pianist or just a composer or just anything. You're going to be Naomi Carter, and that will mean something unique. It's going to be challenging, but it's also going to be important. The classical music world needs artists like you who can connect it to broader culture, who can make it relevant to new generations. As Naomi looked toward her future, she carried with her the lessons of her journey, the importance of staying true to yourself, the power of mentorship and support, the responsibility that comes with opportunity, the value of working hard, while also staying connected to the joy that makes art meaningful. She thought about her mother often, about Sarah Carter, who had loved music without ever having the opportunities to develop her gifts professionally. Naomi's success was in many ways fulfilling her mother's unlived dreams, but it was also charting new territory that Sarah could never have imagined. The girl who had once been terrified to walk onto a stage was now confidently planning to reshape what it meant to be a classical musician in the 21st century. The journey from janitor's daughter to celebrated prodigy had been remarkable. But the journey from celebrated prodigy to innovative artist with her own voice that would be even more significant. Naomi was ready for that next chapter, carrying with her everything she had learned, everyone who had supported her, and a vision of what music could be when it wasn't bound by tradition or limited by prejudice. At 16, Naomi Carter's future was impossibly bright, filled with possibility and challenge, and the promise of creating something truly her own. The girl who had proven she belonged in classical music was now working to transform what classical music could be. And everyone who had believed in her from the beginning knew she would succeed because that's what Naomi did. She exceeded expectations, defied limitations, and created beauty from unlikely circumstances. That was her gift. That was her destiny. That was who she was. The story of Naomi Carter transcended any single individual's journey. It became a narrative about fundamental questions of human potential, social justice, and the role of art in society. 3 years after that first transformative performance, these broader themes were what resonated most powerfully with people who followed Naomi's journey. At its core, Naomi's story asked a simple but profound question. How much talent goes undiscovered and undeveloped because of systemic barriers unrelated to ability? The uncomfortable answer was that countless gifted individuals never got the chances Naomi received. For every Naomi Carter whose talent was recognized and nurtured, how many equally gifted children were limited by lack of resources, by working parents with no time for advocacy, by schools that cut arts programs, by communities that lacked exposure to opportunities? This realization drove much of the systemic change that Naomi's success had catalyzed. The Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program and similar initiatives weren't charity. They were efforts to address market failures that prevented talent from flourishing. Classical music, like many elite cultural fields, had operated for generations on the assumption that talent would naturally rise to the top. But Naomi's story demonstrated that this was false. Talent needed opportunity support and belief. Without these elements, even exceptional gifts could remain dormant or undeveloped. The broader message extended beyond music to all areas of human achievement. How many potential scientists never pursued STEM fields because they attended schools without proper lab equipment? How many gifted athletes never developed their abilities because they couldn't afford equipment or coaching? How many brilliant writers never honed their craft because they were working multiple jobs to survive? The talent existed, distributed democratically across all communities and backgrounds, but opportunity was distributed highly unequally concentrated among those with wealth and connections. Naomi's story also challenged assumptions about what success looked like and who was capable of achieving it. She didn't fit any of the traditional markers associated with classical music success. Wealthy family early childhood training immersion in high culture from birth attendance at prestigious schools. By conventional wisdom, she shouldn't have succeeded. But she did, demonstrating that conventional wisdom was built on class prejudice rather than understanding of actual talent development. This realization was uncomfortable for many in the classical music establishment. If a janitor's daughter, with 3 years of lessons, could match or exceed performers who had trained since childhood at the finest institutions, what did that say about the value of those expensive institutions? What did it suggest about the relationship between resources and outcomes? These questions forced awkward conversations about whether elite music education was actually superior or just more expensive, whether prestigious credentials reflected genuine excellence or just access to opportunity. The answers were nuanced. Elite training certainly had value. The refinement and polish it provided were real. But Naomi demonstrated that the essential ingredient musical talent and the ability to communicate emotion through sound couldn't be taught at any price. It either existed or it didn't. And if it existed, it could be nurtured through many different pathways, not just the traditional ones. Another dimension of Naomi's story resonated with discussions about dignity and worth. James Carter had spent years working as a janitor, a job that many in the classical music audience looked down upon or didn't notice at all. The revelation that this invisible worker had raised a musical prodigy forced people to confront their own prejudices. If they had dismissed James as unimportant or unremarkable based on his job, what did that say about their judgment of human worth? This theme particularly resonated with working-class audiences who saw their own experiences reflected in the Carter family's story. How many times had they been looked through rather than looked at, dismissed, or patronized, judged by their job title or zip code rather than their character or abilities? Naomi's success was vindication not just for her, but for all those who had been underestimated and overlooked. The universal message that emerged from Naomi's journey was fundamentally hopeful, but also demanding. It was hopeful because it demonstrated that talent could triumph over circumstance, that barriers could be overcome, that support and belief could unlock potential. But it was demanding because it suggested a moral obligation to provide opportunity more equitably, to dismantle systems that prevented talent from flourishing, to judge people by their abilities rather than their advantages. This message found particular resonance among young people, especially those from marginalized communities. Naomi became a symbol of possibility proof that their dreams weren't foolish, that their talents weren't worthless, just because they didn't match traditional templates for success. Parents pinned articles about Naomi to refrigerators, showing their children that someone like them could achieve extraordinary things. Teachers used her story in classrooms to discuss perseverance and following your passion. Community organizations held her up as an example of what proper support and opportunity could achieve. But Naomi was careful not to let her story be weaponized against others facing similar challenges. In interviews, she consistently emphasized how lucky she had been, lucky that her father worked at a concert hall, lucky that Mrs. Sullivan discovered her, lucky that her initial performance received such positive response, lucky in 1,000 small ways that many equally talented people never experienced. "My story isn't proof that anyone can succeed if they just work hard enough," she said in one interview. "It's proof that talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. We need to create more opportunities, not just celebrate the rare cases where someone overcomes enormous odds." This nuanced understanding of her own journey made Naomi's advocacy more credible and effective. She wasn't naively optimistic about the power of hard work to overcome all obstacles. She understood systemic barriers intimately, having faced them herself. But she also maintained hope that these barriers could be dismantled through collective effort and commitment to justice. As Naomi approached her 17th birthday, she thought often about the legacy she wanted to leave. She was young, and presumably had decades of performing and creating ahead of her. But she also understood that her window of maximum public attention and influence might be limited. People loved stories of young prodigies, but interest could wane as she aged and became just another working musician rather than an inspirational narrative. "What do you want to be remembered for?" a journalist asked during an interview. Naomi paused, thinking carefully. "I don't want to be remembered as the janitor's daughter who made it. I want to be remembered as the musician who helped make it possible for other janitors' daughters and sons to make it too. I want the scholarship program to outlast me by decades. I want the conversations about accessibility and equity in classical music to continue long after people stop caring about my story. I want to create music that moves people. But more than that, I want to create change that helps people." This articulation of purpose guided Naomi's decisions about how to use her platform and spend her time. She was selective about performances and opportunities, prioritizing those that either advanced her artistic development or supported causes she cared about. She turned down lucrative opportunities that felt exploitative or that would position her purely as a novelty. She sought out collaborations that pushed her artistically and that could help bridge cultural divides. The universal message of Naomi's story ultimately was about human potential and social responsibility. It demonstrated that every community, every neighborhood, every school contained extraordinary talent waiting to be discovered and developed. But it also demanded action from those with resources and power to create systems that ensured this talent could flourish, regardless of circumstances of birth. 3 years after a frightened 12-year-old walked onto a stage and changed her life, this message continued to resonate and inspire. It had sparked real change while also illuminating how much work remained. And at the center of it all was a young woman who had never forgotten where she came from, who carried her mother's memory and her father's work ethic, who understood that her success was both personal achievement and collective responsibility. Naomi Carter had proven that talent didn't need permission, that art could emerge from anywhere, that music belonged to everyone. That was her gift to the world. That was her legacy already being written at such a young age, and it would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and changing minds long after the applause faded. As we close Naomi Carter's remarkable story, it's worth reflecting on what we can all take from her journey. Her success didn't happen in a vacuum. It required the support of her father, who sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. It required the generosity of Mrs. Sullivan, who saw potential and chose to nurture it rather than dismiss it. It required a system that, despite its flaws, eventually provided a platform for talent to be recognized. And it required Naomi's own determination, her refusal to be limited by others' expectations, her commitment to using music as a force for connection and change. Each of us has a role to play in creating a world where more Naomis can succeed. If you're an educator, look for the students who might be overlooked, who don't fit traditional molds of promise. Give them chances. Believe in them. If you have resources, support programs that provide opportunities to young people regardless of their background. The Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program continues its work, still serving hundreds of students annually, still creating pathways for talent to flourish. Organizations like it exist in communities across the country, doing essential work with often limited resources. If you're a young person facing obstacles similar to what Naomi faced, know that your dreams aren't foolish. Your talents matter. Your voice deserves to be heard. Find mentors who believe in you. Work relentlessly to develop your gifts. And when you achieve success, remember to extend a hand to others, still climbing. If you're a parent, encourage your children's passions even when they seem impractical or beyond your resources. Find creative ways to provide opportunities. Advocate for them. Believe in their potential. Your support matters more than any amount of money or privilege. And if you simply love music and the arts, attend performances by young artists. Support diverse programming at concert halls and venues. Push back against the idea that classical music or any art form belongs only to certain types of people. Art belongs to everyone. Talent exists everywhere. The barriers that prevent people from developing and sharing their gifts are human-made and can be human-unmade. Naomi's story demonstrates what's possible when we commit to tearing down those barriers, when we choose to judge people by their abilities rather than their circumstances, when we provide support and opportunity to those who need it most. 3 years after a 12-year-old girl sat at a piano and silenced a concert hall, the work continues. The Sarah Carter Memorial Scholarship Program has expanded to serve students in 15 cities. Hundreds of young musicians are receiving training and support they wouldn't otherwise have access to. The conversation about equity and accessibility in classical music has become mainstream. Change is happening incrementally, but persistently. But there's so much more to do. Countless talented young people still lack opportunities. Arts programs remain underfunded in schools serving low-income communities. Barriers of cost access and prejudice still limit who gets to participate in and benefit from the arts. The journey that began with one girl's courage is far from over. It requires ongoing commitment, resources, advocacy, and belief that talent deserves opportunity regardless of where it comes from. If Naomi's story has moved you, let that emotion translate into action. Support. Arts education programs in your community. Attend performances by young artists. Donate to scholarship funds. Advocate for policies that provide equitable access to opportunities. Mentor someone. Believe in someone. Give someone a chance they wouldn't otherwise have. That's how Naomi's story continues. That's how we honor Sarah Carter's memory. That's how we create a world where talent can flourish everywhere, not just in privileged enclaves. The girl who was once told she didn't belong proved everyone wrong. Now she's working to ensure that other kids don't have to overcome the same obstacles, don't have to face the same skepticism, don't have to work as hard to prove their worth. That's the true measure of success, not just personal achievement, but creating pathways for others to achieve as well. Thank you for listening to Naomi's story. If it inspired you, honor that inspiration by taking action. Because the next Naomi is out there right now in some community, in some school, in some family that's struggling to provide opportunities. They have the talent. They have the dream. They just need the chance. Let's make sure they get it.